When my granddaughter slipped me a seed packet at her school spring fair and whispered, "Grandpa, don't drink the purple tea tonight," I thought she was talking like a child who had overheard adults she did not understand. Then she leaned closer, eyes wide in that serious way children get when fear teaches them to skip childhood for a moment, and said, "Dad told Mom the land has to be gone before the roses bloom." I remember going very still. Because there are sentences that sound strange, and then there are sentences that rearrange the whole room around them. The paper packet in my hand said "climbing sweet peas" across the front in green ink. Wren had written my name on the back in looping pencil letters that still leaned too hard to the right. Around us the school gym smelled like frosting, poster paint, and the sharp sweet dirt scent from the little herb planters the third graders were selling to raise money for field trips. Somebody's homemade speaker was playing old Motown too loud. A toddler was crying near the raffle table. People were laughing. Bidding on silent auction baskets. Carrying cupcakes on paper napkins. The world had not changed. Mine had. Wren kept her small hand on my wrist and looked at me the same way her grandmother used to when she wanted to make sure I was actually listening and not just waiting for my turn to talk. "Don't drink it," she said again. "Not the one in the blue mug. Mom says you sign faster when you're sleepy." Then the music started up even louder, and across the gym my daughter-in-law Nora turned from the volunteer table and smiled at us with the bright careful smile she used whenever other people were watching. I smiled back. That was the first lie I told that day. By the end of that same week my son would be screaming that I had stolen his future while standing in the greenhouse my wife built with her own hands. The county recorder would have copies of documents Caleb thought I was too foggy to understand. A detective would be waiting in an unmarked SUV by the irrigation pond. And the people who had spent nearly 2 years telling my town I was slipping into grief-driven confusion would finally run out of soft words to hide behind. But when Wren pressed that seed packet into my palm, none of that had happened yet. All I knew was this. My granddaughter was afraid of a blue mug. And somebody in my own family was talking about my land like it had a deadline. My name is Benjamin Mercer. Most people in Lancaster County call me Ben. I am 71 years old, widowed, slower on stairs than I used to be, still steady with my hands, and until recently I believed I understood the shape of my life. I owned Mercer greenhouses and nursery on a little rise of land outside Liddy's. 3 connected greenhouses, 6 hoop houses, a weathered white farmhouse, 1 cinder block propagation building with an office above it, and 14 acres of soil that had taught me almost everything worth learning about patience. My wife Hannah and I built the business over 42 years. That sentence sounds cleaner than the life itself was. What we really built it out of was salvaged glass, stubbornness, borrowed money, compost that smelled like trouble, and the kind of young marriage confidence that makes 2 people look at an empty field and see an entire future where most sensible people would just see wind. The first greenhouse came from a dairy farmer in Lebanon County who was tearing down an old range house and selling the panes for almost nothing if the buyer promised to haul them away himself. Hannah made sandwiches at dawn. I borrowed my brother's truck. We spent 2 freezing Saturdays loading glass and steel ribs while our fingers went numb and our backs ached. Hannah stood in the mud in a red knit cap with her hands on her hips and said, "One day people are going to drive out here on purpose just to buy geraniums from us." I laughed because at the time all we had was a half-sunk truck, 3 unpaid bills, and a field that collected standing water every spring. She was right anyway. She was right about most things that mattered. Hannah understood people and plants in the same inconvenient way. She paid attention longer than anyone else did, and because of that she noticed the turn before it happened. Powdery mildew before it spread. A cracked marriage before the anniversary party. A teenager getting ready to leave town for good before he even knew it himself. She had what she called practical hope, which is hope with boots on. When people picture a nursery they imagine flowers and baskets and maybe a woman in a sun hat smiling at petunias. A real nursery is numbers, timing, spoiled flats, wholesale invoices, hoses that split on the coldest day of the year, payroll, aphids, late frosts, retail customers who think plants are either furniture or miracles, and 100 quiet judgments every week that decide whether you make it through the season or start selling equipment in August. Hannah loved all of it. Not just the roses she became known for or the cottage garden borders she could lay out in her sleep. All of it. The dirt under her nails. The books. The seed trials. The inventory sheets. The old radio in the transplant house. The tiny little triumph of a plug tray coming up exactly even. Mercer Greenhouses was as much her mind as it was my labor. That matters because when people later told me I should have sold the place and simplified, what they were really asking was whether I should hand over the physical map of my marriage because grief had made the rest of the world impatient. The answer was always no. My son Caleb knew that. He had grown up on those rows. Learned to count by seed trays. Learned to swear by hearing me fix irrigation lines in July. Learned to ride a bike on the gravel path between the hoop houses. When he was little he used to fall asleep on flattened soil bags in the office while Hannah closed out the register at Christmas market time. One year he built a fort out of poinsettia sleeves and declared himself mayor of the greenhouse. He was a bright kid. Restless. Fast. The kind of boy who liked the nursery well enough until he was old enough to imagine bigger things happening somewhere else. I did not hold that against him. A field that looks like a kingdom to one generation can look like a fence to the next. Caleb studied business at Penn State Harrisburg, stayed away after graduation, bounced through commercial landscaping, then project management for a site development company, then a partnership in a residential land deal that seemed to involve too many spreadsheets and not enough actual soil for my taste. Hannah said he had inherited my appetite for work and none of my suspicion toward polished men with optimistic numbers. That was accurate. Nora entered the picture when Caleb was 30. She was pretty in a way that made people straighten their posture without meaning to. Dark hair always neat, nails always clean, voice always low enough to sound reasonable even when the words themselves deserved harder scrutiny. She had worked in admissions and family coordination at an assisted living facility outside Reading. She knew how to speak the language of concern so fluently that you almost felt rude interrupting it. She remembered birthdays. Sent tasteful sympathy flowers. Could write a thank you note that made you feel both appreciated and subtly managed. Hannah distrusted her almost immediately. Not openly. Hannah was not careless. But she watched Nora the same way she watched plants that had looked too glossy when they came in from a new supplier. One night after Caleb and Nora left our house, Hannah stood at the sink rinsing out wine glasses and said, "She never says what she wants first. She says what would be best for everyone." I shrugged. "That's not a crime." "No," Hannah said. "But it is a method." At the time I thought she was being harder than the situation required. That memory did not become useful until far too late. Ren was born the year Hannah turned 64. There are moments in life that arrive like daylight and make everything look briefly restored. That child was one of them. Hannah was fierce with her from the beginning. Not indulgent exactly. Fierce in that grandmother way that seems gentle to outsiders but is actually full-scale devotion armed with snacks and opinions. She taught Ren how to deadhead marigolds, how to loosen roots before transplanting, how to smell soil and tell whether it was still cold underneath. Ren followed her around the nursery in bright boots with tiny frogs on them, asking serious impossible questions about worms, heaven, and whether begonias got lonely if you bought only one. By the time she was 6 she could sweep the retail house faster than any summer hire and tell a zonal geranium from an ivy without looking at the tag. Caleb and Nora lived in a townhouse development outside of Freda then. Nice enough place. Small yard. Too many matching roofs. They came out most Sundays. Sometimes Caleb helped with loading mulch or fixing the skid steer if it was acting up. Sometimes Nora sat on the porch with iced tea and talked to Hannah about schools, recipes, or whatever woman in her neighborhood had embarrassed herself by trying to make sourdough an entire personality. From the outside we looked ordinary, That is one of the reasons people miss family betrayals when they are close. Ordinary lives wear disguises well. Then Hannah got sick. I have found that all serious illnesses eventually split memory into before language and after language. Before, you say things like tired, stress, maybe a virus, not herself. After, you say words like mass, grade, margins, seizure threshold, treatment window. Hannah's began with headaches. Not dramatic ones at first. Just a dull pulsing pressure behind the eyes. Then some misfires. A coffee mug set inside the refrigerator. A customer's name gone mid-sentence. A pair of pruning shears placed in the bread box and discovered 3 hours later with that laugh she used when she did not want me to see she was frightened. We got the scan in late October. Glioblastoma. There are diagnoses so brutal they do not even feel medical at first. They feel architectural. Like somebody has quietly taken a sledgehammer to the load-bearing wall of your life and then asked whether you would like to discuss treatment calendars. We had 14 months from scan to funeral. 14 months of surgery, steroids, nausea, careful hope, and the special kind of exhaustion that enters a household when time becomes both the most precious and most expensive thing in it. Hannah tried to work longer than I wanted her to. She would sit in the office wrapped in one of my old flannels with a knit cap over the scar, going through seed catalogs as if spring orders still obeyed ordinary rules. Even when her hands shook she wanted to review rose stock. Even when the radiation made her skin look paper thin she argued with me over whether we should keep trialing the pale apricot climber she loved and I thought had weak stems. She did not surrender gracefully because she did not believe surrender deserved grace. The winter before she died, snow hit early and hard. We sat in the living room with a space heater humming and Wren asleep across Hannah's lap after decorating seed packets with crayons. Caleb and Nora had already gone home. The house smelled like wood smoke and eucalyptus lotion and the peppermint tea Hannah could barely stomach by then. She touched Wren's hair for a long time and said, "When I'm gone, they're going to tell you simplifying is wisdom." I turned from the chair because I hated when she talked that clearly. "You're not going anywhere tonight." "I know," she said. "That is not the same as never." I said nothing. She looked at me with those sharp tired eyes and said, "Ben, listen carefully. Do not let grief volunteer your judgment to other people." At the time I thought she meant salesmen, developers, maybe even Caleb's endless appetite for easier ways to do hard things. I did not understand she was warning me about my own family. Hannah died in early January just before dawn while the boiler clicked in the basement and a sleet storm worried the windows. Wren had made her a drawing the afternoon before of a greenhouse with giant yellow tulips and the words "Grandma can rest here too if she wants." Hannah laughed softly when she saw it and asked me to tape it where she could see it from the bed. She squeezed my hand once that last morning and then she was gone. There is a certain silence that enters a house after the body is removed and the casseroles have not yet started arriving. It is not emptiness exactly. It is rearrangement. Every object seems to have lost its category. The mug is no longer a mug. It is the mug she used. The cardigan is no longer clothing. It is the shape of shoulders that are not coming back. The whole house became that for me. Caleb and Nora were helpful at first. That is important. Predation is rarely foolish enough to arrive wearing its real face. They handled calls. Coordinated the church meal train. Helped with the funeral reception. Nora managed paperwork with an efficiency that felt merciful while I was too numb to argue with forms. Caleb started showing up before dawn to help with boilers and deliveries because the winter annual cycle does not pause for bereavement. If the story had stopped there, I would have remembered that period as family rising under pressure. It did not stop there. 2 weeks after the funeral Caleb came into the office while I was staring at invoices I could read but not understand and said, "Dad, Nora and I were talking. We think it might make sense for us to stay a little while. Just till you get your feet back under you. The drive from Ephrata is killing us anyway. Wren loves it here. We can help with the business and the house. He said it like a solution that had occurred naturally. Not like the first move in a very patient strategy. I said no the first time. He nodded like he respected that. 3 days later Nora called and said Caleb was only asking because he was worried. She said grief can do funny things to concentration. She said the nursery had too much tied up in spring pre-orders for me to shoulder alone while my blood pressure was already up. She said that last part in the gentle confidential tone people use when pretending health is the whole reason they are crossing a boundary. At church that Sunday the pastor asked whether I was managing well enough at home. That was the first moment I understood they had already started the conversation around me. Not loudly. Just enough. By February they had moved into the farmhouse. Caleb took the downstairs room that used to be our den, saying it would help if he could hear the back entrance at night in case I needed anything. Nora took over the kitchen without asking, which I was secretly grateful for at first because the sight of Hannah's aprons hanging by the pantry made cooking feel like an ambush. Wren's small sneakers started appearing by the mudroom bench. Her books piled on the side table. Her crayons migrated everywhere the way children's things always do. At first it did make the house less silent. At first that felt like grace. Looking back now, I think some of the worst decisions of my life came wrapped in relief. The first real shift was paperwork. It always is, or close enough. Not the dramatic kind with court stamps and judges. The smaller kind. Access forms. Temporary authorizations. Vendor permissions. Payroll signatures. The 1,000 little administrative shortcuts grief makes feel merciful. Caleb said the nursery software was outdated and half the supplier portals needed two-factor codes sent to my phone, which I kept forgetting to charge. That part was true. Nora said it would be easier if they handled incoming invoices for the season because concentration was hard after a loss and nobody wanted me signing checks twice or missing a due date just because my head was somewhere else. That part was also true, at least the first half of it. So I signed a limited operating authorization for the business accounts. Then a mail forwarding request for some vendor correspondence to the office desk Nora had set up in the den. Then a health information release because she said if my doctor ever needed to coordinate around stress or medication changes, she could help manage appointments while I was at the nursery. Every step had a reason. Every reason sounded compassionate. And in the state I was in then, compassion felt close enough to trust that I stopped checking the difference. Spring came late that year. The houses warmed slower than usual. Our geranium plugs lagged by a week. The first truckload of bagged mulch arrived under cold rain and sat under tarps longer than I wanted. Customers still came, because spring retail customers always come. It does not matter if the sky looks offended by the season. People feel one warm afternoon and suddenly decide they were born to garden. I worked. Of course I worked. But grief is a sly kind of exhaustion. It lets you do the obvious tasks and steals your margins. I could carry flats. Check irrigation. Help a woman choose between two hydrangeas she was probably going to underwater anyway. What I could not do as well was hold the whole map of the business in my head the way I used to. That was where Caleb stepped in. He took over landscape contractor orders. Spoke to delivery drivers. Reworked some wholesale pricing. Created spreadsheets with tabs and color coding I did not ask for. He kept saying the nursery had untapped value in the land itself, which is the sort of phrase that should have made me throw him out of the office right then. Untapped value in the land itself. That is what people say when they have started seeing soil as a real estate asset instead of a living thing. I told him as much. He laughed and said, "I'm not talking about selling. I'm talking about leverage. Flexibility. Using what you've built more intelligently." That sounded like his old life. Not mine. When Hannah was alive, she could stop those conversations with one look. Not an argument. Just a look that said the land is not a coin, and suddenly even Caleb would remember who had grown him. Without her, I found those discussions wearing me down instead of ending. Nora's part was subtler. She started bringing tea in the evenings. I never drank much tea beyond what Hannah brewed when one of us had a cold, but Nora swore by what she called calming blends. Lavender. Butterfly pea flower. Chamomile. Lemon balm. Nothing heavy, she said the first time she set a blue stoneware mug on the table beside me. Just something to help your body stop running from one thought to the next. The tea was purple before the cream hit it. That odd twilight blue-violet color that looked almost decorative. I drank it because it seemed harmless and because refusing kindness from your own family, especially right after your wife dies, can feel like accusing them of something you do not yet have the courage to imagine. The first nights I slept hard afterward. Hard enough that I woke thick-headed. Not hungover exactly. Just dim around the edges. Nora said grief fatigue was catching up with me and that deeper sleep was a good sign. The second shift was sleep itself. When Hannah was alive, I slept on the left side of the bed because her back hurt on the right. Little marriage habits become invisible until one person dies and suddenly you are lying on your own side of the mattress like a man following rules from a country that no longer exists. In March I woke one night and found Caleb standing in the doorway. Not in a threatening way. In a listening way. He said he thought he heard me calling out. I told him I had not. He looked embarrassed. Said maybe he had heard the pipes. 2 days later Nora asked over breakfast whether I remembered trying to go outside around 2 in the morning. I stared at her. No. She exchanged a look with Caleb. The kind of look people think is quiet when what it actually is theatrical. You opened the mudroom door, she said carefully. You seemed disoriented. Caleb got you turned around. I did not. You may not remember. There it was. Not accusation. Interpretation. I laughed because the whole thing struck me as absurd. Maybe I was sleepwalking to the boiler, I said. No one laughed with me. That should have mattered more in the moment. By April the story of my health had started circulating in those soft community channels where gossip goes to launder itself into concern. A church friend asked whether I had seen a neurologist yet. A vendor from York offered to resend an invoice because he heard I had had a hard spell. Miriam Soto, who had been with us for 12 years and knew exactly how many hanging baskets could fit on the east aisle bench without blocking the door, came into the potting shed one morning and said, "Are you all right?" I said yes. She wiped soil off her hands and looked at me with that long steady face of hers. Because Caleb told Hector you're not supposed to drive alone now. That got my full attention. What? She shrugged once. He said the doctor wants you taking it easier. Something with your blood pressure and memory. I stood there with a crate of calabracoa in my hands and felt something small and cold settle behind my ribs. At first it was not fear. It was embarrassment. No man likes learning that people are speaking about his decline before he has even been told what decline he is supposedly experiencing. That night I asked Caleb directly what he had been saying. He got defensive immediately, which is almost always information. I'm not saying anything bad, Dad. I'm heading off confusion. You've been forgetting things. You've been under a ton of stress. People notice. People notice what you tell them to notice. Nora stepped in before the room could harden. Always Nora. She said everybody was just worried because grief does strange things and maybe it would help if I had a simple checkup to reassure everyone. Reassure everyone. Not reassure me. Everyone. I almost said no. That was the first of a series of almost useful instincts I ignored. Instead I went. Dr. Leland Pike saw older patients for cognitive and mood assessments out of a private office in Lancaster. Nora scheduled it. Nora drove. Nora sat in the waiting room with a magazine while I answered questions about the date, the president, a list of words, shapes on paper, a clock face. I was irritated enough by the whole thing that I probably looked worse than I felt. Pike was polite. Over-groomed. Too interested in my sleep and appetite. He asked whether I had experienced moments of disorientation, repetitive thinking, emotional flooding, wandering impulses, trouble managing bills. I told him my wife had been dead 3 months and that if he was asking whether grief had made me a little tired and a little angry at stupid questions, the answer was yes. He made a note. I did not like that. At the end he said what private specialists often say when they want to sound definitive without being pinned to anything. Mild stress-related cognitive strain is not unusual in early bereavement. I'd recommend reducing decision load for a season, improving sleep architecture, avoiding isolation, and letting trusted family support financial and medical logistics until routine stabilizes. That was all. No diagnosis. No dementia. No catastrophe. But when Nora retold the visit to other people later, what remained was not routine stabilizes. What remained was specialist recommends family support. Once you understand that certain people hear language as material, the whole story changes. They do not listen for truth. They listen for usable shapes. By Mother's Day the downstairs den had become Caleb's office, complete with 2 monitors, rolled plans, and a whiteboard full of arrows and acreage numbers he thought I was not really reading. He said his old development contacts were feeding him side work. Concept planning. Site viability. Feasibility review. That alone irritated me, because a greenhouse full of actual living inventory was being treated with less seriousness than his speculative arrows. Then one Monday evening Nora set the purple tea beside me and said, almost casually, "We were thinking the room above propagation might be easier for you for a little while." I looked up from the ledger. What room? The office apartment. It was not an apartment. It was a long narrow second-floor room above the cinder block propagation building with one slanted ceiling, a half-bath, a hot plate nobody should trust, 2 windows facing the rose field, and enough insulation to make summer loud and winter personal. Hannah and I had once planned to turn it into a proper retreat room for visiting wholesalers during show weeks. That plan, like many others, had been swallowed by work and time. "It's quiet up there," Nora said. "You've been telling everyone the house feels crowded and overstimulating. If you had your own space close to the greenhouses, it might help you rest." I had told no one the house felt overstimulating. Caleb jumped in. "It'd only be temporary. Ren's school year is wrapping up and she really needs a consistent downstairs routine. Plus if you're closer to the houses, you can still be right where you want to be in the mornings." I stared at both of them. A sensible man would have understood exactly what was happening right then. I was not sensible. I was lonely, tired, and desperate for any arrangement that did not require me to feel like a guest in my own kitchen every evening. So I said yes. They helped me move in the next day. Helped is the generous word. Really they curated. 1 dresser. 1 chair. My books. Some framed photos. Enough clothes to look considerate but not enough to let the space feel like mine. Nora brought fresh sheets and said the view of Hannah's roses would probably comfort me. Caleb installed a new keypad lock on the outside door and said it was just to secure inventory because fertilizer theft had been a problem all over the county. That part was probably true. The fact that only he and Nora ever seemed to know the code was not. The room above propagation was where the long thinning out of my life really began. In summer it trapped heat. In winter the pipes complained before dawn and the wind found every seam around the frames. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself quieter space might actually help me sleep. I told myself a lot of things that year because the truth required more anger than I was ready to use. Once I was upstairs, everything became easier for them. The house stayed theirs below. The phone was usually answered before I reached it. Mail got sorted for me. Nora started bringing the evening tea as naturally as if it had always belonged to my life. The blue mug became routine. And routine is how captivity hides in decent families. Not chains. Routine. The third shift was my body. There is a difference between grief exhaustion and chemical heaviness. I know that now. At the time I did not have the language. I only knew that on some evenings, especially those that came before a bank visit, a doctor call, or one of Caleb's tense little, business conversations, the tea tasted slightly sweeter and my eyelids turned to wet sand within 40 minutes. The mornings after those nights always seemed to contain paperwork. A release form. A signature line. A document Caleb had already filled out to make it easier. I signed an updated business access authorization in June because a supplier had changed their payment portal. I signed a letter letting Caleb speak to our insurance broker because storm claims and greenhouse coverage were too detail-heavy right now. I signed something Nora described as a continuity packet for medical coordination because Dr. Pike had suggested reducing stress around appointments. No one shoved a pen in my hand and said, "Here, old man, sign your life away." Real predators do not work like that. They wait until the pen feels like relief. Miriam noticed more than she said. That is another thing that matters. Not everyone who sees abuse speaks quickly. Sometimes they are testing whether they are crazy first. One brutally hot afternoon in July she brought up a flat of salvias to the propagation room and found me asleep in the chair at 3:30 with a half-finished payroll envelope on the desk. She set the tray down harder than she needed to. I woke with my heart pounding. "You sick?" she asked. "No. You look drugged." I almost laughed because the phrase sounded too blunt to be real. "Thanks." She did not smile. "Ben, I've watched you run this place through flood years, boiler failures, Hannah's chemo, and that time the West House glass blew out in a March wind and you spent 6 hours patching heat loss with greenhouse plastic and profanity. You don't just fall asleep sitting up in the middle of payroll week." I shrugged because I did not know how to answer that without making the room dangerous. She stood there another second, then said, "If you need me to start copying things, tell me." That sentence stayed with me. If you need me to start copying things. At the time I did not tell her yes. I wish I had. By August Caleb had started talking more openly about strategic options for the back acreage. Not the front retail section. Not the houses. The back 14 where Hannah's trial rose beds, the irrigation reservoir, the old willow line, and the field access road all sat. He said warehouse groups were buying all over the county. Light distribution. Specialty fulfillment. Agricultural support logistics. Always a new pretty phrase for paving over things people love. I said no before he finished the pitch. He said I was being emotional. I said that was one of the perks of owning land outright. He laughed with no warmth in it and said, "You may not be the sole decision maker forever, Dad." That was the first overtly threatening sentence he said to me. He smiled right after as if he could walk it back with his face. He could not. I carried that sentence for weeks. You may not be the sole decision maker forever. Around the same time Ren changed. Children under pressure do not always get louder. Some of them get very, very careful. She still came up to the propagation room after school some afternoons, but never without glancing toward the house first. She still drew at the little metal desk by the window, but she erased more. Once I offered her hot chocolate and she asked whether Nora knew she was there. Another time she picked up the blue mug from my nightstand, sniffed it, and set it down too fast. "What is it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." Then, a minute later, Grandma never made purple tea. "No," I said. She didn't. Ren nodded like that had confirmed something. She started leaving me drawings hidden in seed catalogs. Not notes exactly. Just drawings. The farmhouse with big eyes in the windows. The propagation building with a lock drawn too large. A rose bed with the flowers colored red except for one white bloom in the middle. At the bottom of that one she had written, "Something is wrong with this." I told myself she was processing grief in a child's sideways way. I told myself children put fear into symbols because symbols are safer than statements. That was true. It was also incomplete. The first true shock came in October. I had gone down to the house earlier than usual because I could not find the propane invoice file and Nora always claimed to know where paperwork had wandered. She was out back with laundry. Caleb was on the phone in the den. I would have turned around if not for the fact that he said my name and the tired suspicious animal inside me suddenly went still. I stopped outside the half-closed door. He was pacing. "No, I understand the carrying cost," he said. "I'm telling you the acreage is clean. The old man is the only obstacle. No, not legally yet. Functionally. He's slipping. We're already documenting. Nora's got Pike on record recommending reduced decision load and family support. The rest is timing." My hands went cold. He paused, listening. Then he said, quieter now, "I know the number. We need the advance before the end of Q4 or the Lebanon parcel blows up. I'm not asking for charity, Dalton. I'm telling you the land is worth 3 times this once I get him out of the way." I do not remember leaving the doorway. I only remember being back upstairs in the propagation room with the windows open despite the cold and the blue mug from the night before still sitting on the desk beside an unsigned invoice. The old man is the only obstacle. That sentence did something my grief had not done. It cleared me. Not all at once. But enough that when Nora brought the tea that night and smiled her little concerned smile, I looked at the surface in the blue mug and for the first time wondered whether rest had ever been the point. I did not drink it. I waited until her footsteps crossed the gravel toward the house, then poured it into the potted basil by the window. The next morning I woke before dawn with no chemical sludge behind my eyes. No thick tongue. No slow headache. Just anger. Anger, when it arrives cleanly after a long period of confusion, can feel almost holy. For the first time in months I went through the previous week in sharp sequence. The way certain nights matched certain documents. The way Caleb's hard conversations followed the sweeter tasting tea. The way Nora always seemed calmest when I was most fogged. By breakfast I knew 2 things. First, the tea mattered. Second, I was already late. I started pretending to drink it after that. Not every night. Too obvious. Enough. I would hold the mug long enough for the smell to get on my hands, carry it upstairs, pour it out into different planters or the mop sink, rinse lightly, and leave enough residue that no one looking quickly would notice. Within 4 days my head felt like my own again. Within a week I found the first county guardianship brochure tucked inside a file folder Nora had left half hidden under a stack of seed invoices. The cover showed a silver-haired man smiling at a lake while his adult daughter held his elbow. Compassionate guidance for families facing cognitive decline, it said. Inside were yellow sticky notes in Nora's handwriting. Emergency temporary guardianship. Physician declaration. Incapacity standard. Property authority. Memory care placement options. I sat there with the folder open on my lap and felt the floor of the room shift. They were not just talking about support. They were building for legal control. That was the first morning I almost called the police. Almost. The problem with almost is that it keeps cowards company. I was not afraid of a patrol car. I was afraid of being wrong in a way they could use. What if the tea was only tea? What if the brochure was only research? What if grief really had made me paranoid and suspicious and difficult? That is how abuse keeps its footing. Not because the victim knows nothing. Because the victim knows just enough to fear looking mad. Then came the spring fair and the seed packet. By then I had already seen enough to suspect them. What Ren gave me was not suspicion. It was direction. She told me there was a blue mug that mattered. She told me somebody was talking about the land being gone before the roses bloomed. And once a child tells you not to drink what your family is handing you, you are out of the land of uncertainty forever. The spring fair ended at 2:30. Nora wanted to stop for frozen yogurt with Ren on the way home. I said I had paperwork at the nursery and drove separately. That gave me 40 minutes alone before they got back. 40 minutes to stand in the propagation room with the seed packet in my hand and admit the sentence I had been trying not to think all winter. My family was not worried I would lose control. They wanted me controlled. Once I said that to myself, 100 small scenes rearranged. The way Nora stood in my doorway at night listening before she stepped fully into the room. The way Caleb used health language only when money was nearby. The way people in town repeated concern that always seemed to carry the same shape. The way Ren looked at the blue mug. I sat at the desk and made the first useful list I had made in months. What I knew. What I suspected. What could be proved. That is the thing grief had taken from me and anger gave back. Sequence. The first point was easy. The tea. If the tea was harmless, I needed to know that. If it was not, I needed something stronger than my own restored clarity. Miriam came in at 4 carrying transplant trays and an expression that said she had already decided I was going to either tell her the truth that day or lie so badly she would have to intervene anyway. I held up the blue mug. Do you know anyone who can tell me what's in this? She did not ask why. That is another reason I trusted her. She only asked, how fast? Tonight if possible. She nodded once. My sister-in-law manages the pharmacy at urgent care in Mannheim. She won't run a lab. But she can tell you if somebody's been getting creative with over-the-counter sleep aid and crushed prescription leftovers. Give me the mug. I handed it over. She sniffed the inside and frowned. Lavender. Chamomile. And something bitter hiding under sweet. That sentence made my stomach turn. Miriam took the mug in a produce box under a stack of catalogs and left through the back drive. Nora and Caleb came home 20 minutes later. I told them I was tired and going upstairs early. That night Nora brought the tea again. I smiled and thanked her. Then I watched her eyes while I lifted the mug. People who are actually nurturing you look at your face when they hand you something. People who are checking compliance watch the swallow. She watched the swallow. I waited until she left and poured the tea into the mop sink. Miriam texted me just after 9:30 from a number I did not recognize. Not clean. Diphenhydramine for sure. Possibly trazodone residue. Need full lab for certainty. I read that line 4 times. Then once more. Not because the words were complicated. Because they were final. My daughter-in-law had been drugging me. Maybe lightly some nights. Maybe harder on others. Maybe just enough to keep me heavy, slow, and easy to direct. But she had been doing it. A lot of older people spend years waiting for proof strong enough to let themselves feel outrage. I had mine in a 9-word text from a woman I had never met. The next morning I called Ada Sinclair. Not from the house phone. Not from my cell, which Nora had been charging for me more and more often lately and which I no longer trusted near her hands. I drove into Liddy's before anyone else was fully moving, parked behind the feed mill, and used the pay phone by the laundromat that should have been removed 15 years earlier and never was. Ada picked up on the 4th ring. Sinclair Legal. Her voice always sounded like she was already at the sentence after yours and hoping you would catch up. It's Ben. A pause. Then, softer, Benjamin Mercer, if you are calling me from a pay phone at this hour, something is either very wrong or very stupid. Wrong. Another pause. How wrong? My daughter-in-law may be drugging me. My son may be building a guardianship case. And I think somebody wants my land sold before June. I heard nothing on the line for 2 seconds. Then Ada said, in the calmest voice imaginable, do not say another word where you are. Come to my office by the back stair and do not let anyone follow you. Ada had been Hannah's college roommate at Temple before law school turned her into the kind of woman who could fold a hostile witness with one raised eyebrow. She handled estate planning, probate disputes, farm transfers, and the occasional ugly family mess when money, land, and entitlement found each other at the wrong time. She also loved Hannah in that old solid female friendship way men often underestimate because nobody taught us how powerful women become when they have known each other before mortgages and funerals and still stayed. When I reached Ada's office over the insurance agency on Main Street, she had the coffee made, a yellow pad open, and the blinds half shut. I told her everything. Not well. Not in the polished order I wish I had. People who have been manipulated rarely sound impressive when they finally start telling the truth. They sound embarrassed, repetitive, angry at the wrong moments, and unsure of what counts as evidence. Ada let me sound like all of that. Then she took the yellow pad, drew a line down the center, and said, we separate what you know from what you can prove. So we did. Tea residue with sedative components. Guardianship brochure with Nora's notes. Caleb on the phone saying I was the only obstacle and they were already documenting. A private specialist who had never diagnosed dementia but whose language was being used as if he had. Repeated pressure around land value and reduced decision load. My move to the room above propagation. Rumors about my memory. Possible financial documents I had signed while sedated. Wren's warning about the blue mug. The statement about the land needing to be gone before the roses bloom. When we finished the list, Ada sat back and exhaled once. This is bad, she said. Bad enough for the police? Eventually. But not yet, not if we want to keep them from reshaping the story before we see the whole structure. She looked me in the eye. Ben, I need you to hear me clearly. From this moment forward, you do not confront them emotionally. You do not reveal what you know. You do not stop acting tired just because anger has made you sharper. Sharpness is useful. Surprise is more useful. I nodded because anger had already been pulling me toward the farmhouse by the collar. Ada kept going. Second, we need an independent medical evaluation now. Not Pike. Someone with no connection to Nora, no concierge nonsense, no grief management jargon. Third, we need copies of everything financial before Caleb realizes you're looking. Fourth, we need to know whether there is an active petition in preparation or just planning. Fifth, we need to protect the land before they understand the window is closing. She turned her pad and wrote 3 names. Dr. Meera Shah, geriatric neuropsychologist in Hershey. County Recorder Emergency Filing Clerk. Neil Carver, Detective, Financial Exploitation Unit. I looked at the last name. You already know a detective. I know a man who owes me a favor from an elder title fraud case involving forged quitclaim deeds and a grandson dumb enough to mail the fake paperwork from his own house. Do not look surprised. Pennsylvania contains more family greed than farmland. The difference is the farmland is at least productive. That was Ada. Comfort through contempt. I left her office with instructions, a burner flip phone, and a document envelope that contained nothing but catalogs in case anyone searched it. We used the next 3 days the way people in real danger often do. Boringly. I pretended the spring fair had meant nothing. Nora kept bringing the tea. I kept pretending to drink it. Caleb kept talking about contractors and timelines and outside interest in that falsely casual voice that only made sense if he believed my mind was too clouded to hear the desperation under it. Meanwhile, Miriam started copying things. At first just vendor statements, payroll runs, and bank summary pages from the office printer. Then inventory adjustments Caleb had made. Then a valuation packet he had requested from a commercial brokerage group under the business name but not through any board authorization I remembered giving. Miriam slid the copies into seed catalogs and stacked them by my chair in the propagation room the way we used to hide Christmas bonus envelopes from seasonal hires. She did not ask for explanations. She only asked once, "Do I need to start backing up security footage too?" I looked at her. "We still have footage." She blinked. "Ben, I told Caleb in January not to unplug the back drive and loading bay cameras because the insurance carrier gives us a discount if the system stays live. He said he moved the monitoring feed to the den." "Why?" I nearly laughed from sheer disbelief. Because of course he had not removed the cameras. He had just moved where he thought the old man would not think to ask about them. "Yes," I said. "Back it up." That same week Dr. Mira Shah saw me for nearly 2 hours in Hershey. Ada drove because she said we were not giving anybody the gift of a traffic stop or a missed turn to fold into a later story. Shah did what good clinicians do. She did not accept the shape of the case I brought in. She made me earn my own reality. Memory testing. Executive function. Attention switching. Mood inventory. Detailed questions about medication, sleep, appetite, grief, routine, family reports, business tasks, spatial judgment, verbal recall, and day-to-day decision-making. At the end she removed her glasses and said, "You are grieving. You are angry. You are sleep-deprived. But you are competent. Whatever else is happening around you, it is not progressive cognitive decline." Then she asked, "Do you have reason to believe your sedation is intentional?" I said yes. She wrote that down. Her report was ready in 24 hours. That mattered more than I can explain. Because for the first time, someone with actual credentials had written the truth in plain words. No strain. No reduced load. No family support caveat. Plain words. Competent. Intact judgment. No evidence of dementia. Possible chemical sedation requiring investigation. Ada kept the report locked in her office safe. "Not yet," she said. "The second they know you have this, they accelerate." She was right. Because Caleb was already accelerating. By mid-April his mood had changed from patient manipulation to brittle urgency. He started taking calls outside at night. He snapped at Miriam over wholesale invoices. He asked twice whether I had updated my personal will after Hannah died. Once casually. Once not. Then I found the debt file. Not because I was clever. Because he was sloppy under pressure. The den printer jammed on a Wednesday morning while Nora was in town and Caleb was down at the loading bay arguing with a soil supplier. I went in to clear it because printers and men my age still understand each other better than cloud systems do. The top sheet sticking half out of the roller was from Keystone Bridge Capital. Past due notice. Account holder, Mercer Development Partners LLC. I knew the name. Caleb had formed the partnership 2 years earlier with a man named Russell Bain to acquire and subdivide a tract near Lebanon for compact workforce housing. I told him then that housing sounds noble right up until a man with a drone photo and a bridge loan starts calling wet clay a community footprint. He said I was romanticizing dirt. The project had stalled after zoning fights and stormwater issues. Caleb insisted it would recover. The past due notice said otherwise. Minimum cure amount in 10 days, $184,000. Default acceleration exposure, $612,000 plus interest, legal fees, and secured asset review. Secured asset review. That phrase made me keep digging. The drawer beneath the printer contained more. A Dalton Kessler commercial proposal for strategic acquisition of Mercer Back acreage contingent upon management authority and clean title capacity certification. An appraisal placing the back 14 acres at a number that made my stomach clench. Texts between Caleb and someone saved as DK. Need him softened before board review. Pike language helps, but Nora has to keep him compliant through May. If roses go public again, the conservation crowd will complicate everything. We need the petition filed before Memorial Day. I took photos with the burner phone as fast as my hands would move. Then I heard Nora's car on the gravel. I jammed the papers back into the drawer, cleared the printer, and stepped out just as she came through the mudroom carrying grocery bags and concern on her face like it was part of the shopping. "You look pale," she said. I smiled. Maybe I need some tea. If she found that answer strange, she hid it. That night Ada added the debt numbers to the board she had started in her office. $206,000 for me over 16 months in direct support transfers and business access leakage we could already identify. $612,000 hanging over Caleb's failed development company. A pending acquisition offer for my land. An apparent plan to use guardianship or incapacity certification to clear the final obstacle. The timing is the point, Ada said. They don't want you eventually contained. They want you contained before that debt collapses the rest of his structure. I looked at the numbers and felt sick in a strangely old-fashioned way. Not at the fraud. At the pettiness. My wife had died less than 18 months earlier. Her rose field was barely settled into the first full spring without her. And my son had turned our land into a bridge loan solution. I said that out loud. Ada shook her head. No. He turned your grief into a bridge loan solution. The land is just where he planned to collect. That was the sentence I carried home that night. Not because it soothed me. Because it clarified the scale of the betrayal. It was not just that Caleb wanted money. It was that he believed the period after Hannah's death was the right time to reach for it because he thought my grief had lowered the cost of taking it. The next useful break came from Wren. Children notice schedules adults think are invisible. She came up to the propagation room the following Sunday afternoon with a tray of seedlings she had started in egg cartons. Nasturtiums, badly leggy basil, 2 little marigolds, and 1 tomato seedling that had no chance unless somebody intervened quickly. She set them on the desk and said, "Mom says if you do good this week, a doctor comes Friday and then everything gets easier." I kept my face still. What does easier mean? She picked at the label on the tomato. That you don't have to make choices anymore. There are sentences so quietly monstrous that your body does not respond right away because it is still waiting for the rest of the sentence that might make them normal. Nothing else came. Just that. You don't have to make choices anymore. I crouched to her level. Who told you that? She whispered. I was in the pantry when they were talking. Dad said once Dr. Pike signs, Grandpa can't mess up the sale and then we can move somewhere with a pool. I swallowed hard. Did he say sale? She nodded. Mom said not to use that word around you because it makes you have episodes. Episodes. Not confusion. Not grief. Episodes. They had moved on to vocabulary meant for legal papers. I touched her shoulder. Wren, listen to me very carefully. I need you to do 2 things. First, if your mother brings me the blue mug on Friday, I need you to remember what you saw today. Me. Talking to you. Clear. She nodded. Second, if anyone ever tells you I'm confused, you ask them what I planted with you last fall. She frowned. Why? Because confused people don't remember where the climbing roses go. She thought about that and then, wonderfully, almost smiled. The white ones on the east trellis, she said. And the dark red ones by Grandma's bench because she said grief deserves color too. I nodded. Exactly. That night, for the first time since Hannah died, I let myself imagine not only stopping them, but outlasting the story they had written for me. The week before Dr. Pike was supposed to make everything easier, Ada turned our mess into strategy. That was one of her gifts. Not optimism. Not reassurance. Sequence. She took the yellow board in her office and divided it into 4 columns. Control of person. Control of money. Control of narrative. Control of land. Everything Caleb and Nora had done went somewhere under those headings. The T belonged to person. The copied medical language belonged to narrative. The operating authorizations and debt pressure belonged to money. The valuation packet and acquisition proposal belonged to land. When the board was full, Ada stepped back and said, "Good cases get built from motive outward. Great cases get built from system inward. We are not proving they were mean to you. We are proving they built an engine." That changed the way I saw the whole thing. Not a collection of betrayals. An engine. The room above propagation was part of the engine. The T was part of the engine. The rumors, the specialist language, the staged concern, the pressure around spring timing, the child leverage, the debt. All part of the same machine. Neil Carver agreed to meet us Thursday evening in a diner off Route 30 where the pie is good and the coffee tastes like punishment. He arrived in a county windbreaker over plain clothes and looked exactly like the sort of man who had long ago stopped wasting energy on charm. Square face. Short graying hair. The habit of sitting so he could see the entrance without appearing to care. Ada handed him copies. Not originals. Never originals. He read longer than I expected. At the end he put the papers down, folded his hands, and said, "If half of this holds, they're not just managing an old man. They're building legal conditions for asset transfer." That was the first time someone outside Ada said it in terms sharp enough to feel like law instead of humiliation. "Can you arrest them?" I asked. Carver did not smile. "No. Not for making me dislike them. Not yet." He tapped the stack. "I can tell you what matters. Drugging. Documented fraud. Misrepresentation to a medical professional. Coercive isolation. Financial exploitation. Potential unlawful restraint if that keypad and access pattern are doing what I think they're doing. But I need them saying or doing enough that a prosecutor isn't left explaining complicated family dynamics to a jury who thinks this is just a sad inheritance fight." "I'm not dead," I said. "I know," he said. "That helps." Ada almost smiled at that. Carver continued. "The problem with these cases is everyone involved uses the same sentimental words. Support. Burden. Concern. Safety. Simplification. You don't beat those words with your feelings. You beat them with documents, recordings, timelines, and 1 or 2 moments where the polite language drops and the real structure shows." There it was again. The structure. He looked at me. "Can you keep playing tired for another week?" I thought of the blue mug. The keypad. Wren in the pantry hearing her father talk about pools. Hannah's roses beyond the window. My own son speaking about me like a permitting obstacle. "Yes," I said. Carver nodded. Then we used the week. The first thing Ada did was protect the land. Not publicly. Quietly. There are forms of revenge that look like shouting and broken glass. Then there are forms that look like county filings at 9:17 in the morning. Hannah and I had updated our estate plan 10 years earlier after a near miss with an aggressive developer who wanted the corner frontage for a pharmacy. Most of the time, people treat estate plans like moral insurance. Something tidy you by against the future. Hannah treated ours like a field map. Tucked inside the file Ada pulled from her archive was a provision I had forgotten existed. If at any point I, as surviving spouse and controlling owner, chose to place the Rose acreage under conservation easement for horticultural or educational use, the acreage could no longer be redeveloped commercially without a court challenge so ugly and expensive that only fools or men in love with their own signatures would attempt it. Hannah had insisted on the clause. I had teased her for it at the time. "You planning to outsmart me from the grave?" I had asked. She said, "I'm planning for the day somebody calls the Roses inefficient." She was. And she had. Ada prepared the easement papers overnight. Not for all 14 back acres. That would have looked reactionary. Just the central Rose trial fields, the Memorial Bench Grove, and the waterline corridor running through the property in exactly the pattern that made Kessler's logistics plan worthless. If the protected acres stayed, the warehouse layout died. If the layout died, Caleb's numbers died with it. We also created a new trust. Not to disinherit Caleb completely. That would have looked theatrical and vindictive in a way I did not yet need. No. Ada was smarter than that. The Hannah Mercer Horticultural Trust would hold majority voting interest in the nursery land if I were ever declared incapacitated, not Caleb, not Nora, and certainly not any private guardian they waved in through grief language. Its purpose was explicit. Preserve nursery operations, prevent forced liquidation absent actual insolvency, and prioritize intergenerational horticultural use. I named Wren the future beneficiary after my death, with independent trustees, not her parents, until adulthood. When Ada slid the signature page toward me, my hand trembled once. Not from age. From the realization that I was taking the family story they had been planning and writing another one under it. That's the point, Ada said quietly. You are not required to keep your enemies comfortable just because they share your blood. I signed. The recorder stamped. The land changed shape before my son finished breakfast back at the farmhouse. Miriam's camera backups gave us the second break. She came into the propagation room Friday morning with 2 flash drives wrapped inside a potting glove. January through now, she said. Back drive, loading bay, office hall, retail register. I plugged the first into the cheap laptop Ada had given me and started scrolling. Most of it was boring. Trucks. Customers. Deliveries. Snow melt. The ordinary choreography of a working place. Then patterns emerged. Nora coming up to the propagation room nearly every evening with the tray. Caleb entering my room before dawn on the mornings after certain visits. Caleb and Dalton Kessler walking the back acreage with rolled plans while I was supposedly resting upstairs. Dr. Pike's car pulling in twice despite no actual office appointment in the schedule Nora later showed people. And the biggest one. A night in February, long after I had supposedly tried to wander outside in confusion, where the camera showed no such thing. Instead it showed Caleb leaving the house at 1:13 a.m., walking to the mudroom, opening the door, standing there for 10 seconds, then coming back inside. He had manufactured the scene himself. Not only had he lied about my wandering. He had staged the lie. When I showed Ada the clip, she went very still. That, she said, is the kind of small fraud juries understand. Remember that. We gave the clip to Carver the same night. Good, he said. Very good. People like this think the big manipulation is the hard part. Usually it's the little housekeeping lies that hang them. The plan that emerged over the weekend was ugly, necessary, and dangerous. We would not spring early. We would let Friday happen. Friday being the day Dr. Pike was supposed to come for what Nora had called a capacity review and what Wren had translated as the day after which I would not have to make choices anymore. Carver believed Pike might fold under pressure eventually, but not if we spooked him with accusations he could reframe as normal elder support. Better to let him step into the structure and record what he believed was a safe room. Ada believed Caleb would also push harder if he thought the review was the last missing piece before filing a temporary guardianship petition. Miriam believed Nora was getting reckless with the tea because she kept grinding something in the kitchen with the window open and assuming no one could smell bitterness under lavender. I believed if I had to drink one more fake kindness from a blue mug I might throw it through the east window. All four of us were right in our own ways. The rehearsal, if you can call it that, took place in Ada's conference room on Thursday afternoon. Aaron Bell from Carver's office came with 2 small audio units, a button recorder, and the calm confidence of a man who trusted batteries more than family. He showed me where the mic would sit under the collar seam of my work shirt if we needed live audio later. For Friday, though, we kept it simpler. A digital recorder beneath the desk lip in the propagation office. Another in the supply cabinet under the sink. One in my shirt pocket as backup. What do I say? I asked. Ada answered before anyone else. Very little. Carver nodded. Pressure cases work best when the guilty people think they still have room to explain themselves. You ask clean questions. You do not fill silences. You let them reveal their logic. What if Caleb gets angry? Then he gets useful. Aaron demonstrated the devices. Red light on. Hold still. Don't pat the pocket. Don't touch the desk if you can avoid it. Leave air in the room for their voices. If things go physical, say the line and we move. The line? I asked. Ada and Carver had already discussed it. It had to sound like something I would naturally say under pressure, something unlikely to appear by accident, and something that would immediately tell the team outside the threshold had been crossed. In the end Ada chose something simple. Ren deserves better than this. If I said those 5 words in the room, they moved. That line bothered me for a reason I could not fully explain until later. Because underneath the legal plan, what was really being defended was a child's future from 2 adults who had decided her inheritance was easier to steal if her grandfather looked tired enough in the right lighting. Friday came with rain. Of course it did. The kind of raw April rain that makes gravel shine black and every greenhouse sound like it is being wrapped in static. Nora brought the blue mug at 7:15. Big day, she said, smiling almost warmly. Let's make sure you're rested and not overwhelmed before Dr. Pike gets here. I took the mug. Wouldn't want to overwhelm him, I said. She laughed softly, which meant she thought I was joking and not listening to myself. As soon as she left, I poured the tea into a mason jar Ada had given me and sealed it. Chain of custody matters when you are trying to turn domestic treachery into admissible evidence. At 9:10 Dr. Pike arrived. He wore a camel coat and the expression of a man who had already decided the outcome and saw no reason to complicate it with excessive thought. Caleb met him below and walked him upstairs. Nora carried a legal pad and 2 folders. I was seated at the desk by the window with one of Hannah's rose ledgers open in front of me. Not because I wanted a prop. Because I wanted her handwriting in the room. Pike began exactly the way those men always do. Kind voice. Controlled smile. A little too much eye contact. How have you been feeling, Ben? Tired, I said. That part was true. Any recent confusion? No more than usual when strangers come asking whether I know what year it is. He smiled like he was accustomed to older men trying wit as a defense. Nora sat beside him and said, he had another rough evening Tuesday. Repetitive questions. Some fixation on old paperwork. He's also been more resistant to support this week, which usually happens when transitions are coming. Transitions. Everything with them had become a word that meant taking something and calling it mercy. Pike asked me the clock-drawing questions again. The word list. Basic orientation. Some judgment scenarios so childish they insulted me on sight. Your house is on fire, what do you do? A letter is addressed wrong, what do you do? You find a wallet on the ground. I answered carefully. Not brilliantly. Not foolishly. Calmly. Nora kept inserting details around me. He has trouble with sustained decision chains. He perseverates. He does better when someone else structures his day. He forgets meals. He gets agitated when property matters come up. When property matters come up. There it was. Even here, the land sat inside the health story. Pike made notes, then closed his folder. Ben, based on what I'm seeing and on the history provided by your family, I think a formal support arrangement may be appropriate for a period. Not because you lack dignity or value. Because decision burden can become harmful during prolonged bereavement with executive strain. I looked at him. Does that medical language mean someone else gets to decide what happens to my greenhouse? He glanced at Nora before answering. That would depend on the structure chosen. Not no. Never know. Just enough ambiguity to build a handoff around. Caleb stepped in then. We're just trying to protect you, Dad. Nobody's taking anything. That sentence was so practiced I could almost hear earlier rehearsals inside it. I let my shoulders sag. What if I don't want to be protected from my own life? Nora reached for my forearm. I wanted to shake her off. Instead I let the hand sit there like a bandage on somebody else. It won't be forever, she said. Another phrase designed to move quickly because staying under light would kill it. When they left, I handed the mason jar of tea to Ada in the back stairwell where she had slipped in unseen through the supply entrance. She passed it to Aaron, who labeled it immediately. Carver, parked beyond the lower hoop house, listened to the recording in real time later and said Pike had given them exactly what they needed. Not a diagnosis. Better. A willingness to let family history drive legal consequence while pretending clinical neutrality. By Friday evening Nora and Caleb believed they were one clean filing away from controlling me. That belief was the most useful thing we had. On Saturday Ada filed the conservation easement and trust activation documents. On Sunday we moved. Not dramatically. Banking first. A new operating account at Fulton Community Credit Union under updated signature control. Business reserve funds transferred quietly. Personal savings out of any account Caleb had ever touched. Payroll secured. Line of credit access changed. Multi-factor contacts shifted to the burner phone and Ada's escrow office. Then the land records. Then a quiet conversation with the nursery insurance carrier notifying them that no asset disposition or insured party modification was authorized absent direct voice verification from me and Ada. Then supplier notices. Nothing sweeping. Just enough. The trick was not to blow up the structure yet. Just to hollow it out before Caleb tried to stand on it. By Monday morning, the engine still looked intact from inside the farmhouse. But the fuel lines had been rerouted. Caleb sensed something anyway. People living by deceit develop an animal ear for silence they do not own. He came up to the propagation room Monday evening without knocking and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. Rain had moved out. The western light was slanting through the rose beds and turning the whole room a tired gold. His face looked older than I remembered from even a year earlier. Stress had thinned him in mean ways. "You've been busy," he said. That was all. No direct accusation. Just a fishing line dropped into water to see what might rise. I looked up from the ledger. Spring does that. He did not smile. I'm serious. So am I. He took one step into the room. Dad, if you're getting stubborn again because Pike used words you didn't like, don't. We're too far down this road. There it was. Not concern. Not confusion. Ownership. Too far down this road. I leaned back in the chair. What road is that? His jaw flexed. The one where you stop making every necessary decision feel like a betrayal. What decision? He looked toward the window, then back at me. The land. The support structure. The review. All of it. You think this is about one field and some old roses, but it's bigger than that now. The sentence that followed told me exactly how desperate he had become. There are things tied to this you don't understand. No. There were things tied to this I was finally starting to understand very well. I kept my face flat. Then explain them. He laughed once with no humor in it. You couldn't carry it. Then he left. I sat there with the recorder still warm in my pocket and knew the endgame had moved closer. That night Ren slipped into the propagation room after bedtime in mismatched socks and her yellow rain jacket over pajamas. She shut the door gently behind her and whispered, "Are we in trouble?" No child should know enough about a house to ask that question in a whisper. I drew her close. "We are in change," I said. "That means trouble." I almost told her not to be dramatic, then remembered who had trained the house into that word. Instead I asked, "Did something happen?" She nodded. Mom was mad because a man named Dalton kept calling. Dad said if Wednesday goes bad they lose the bridge and then everyone will blame you. Mom said then maybe that's what we need. I held very still. What does lose the bridge mean? I don't know. Neither did she. But I did. Default. Collapse. Time pressure turning manipulation into open violence. Then she said the thing that made me call Carver at 10:11 that same night. Dad said if you won't sign, there are places people can stay where they don't get to say no anymore. Memory care. Lockdown. Removal. The machine was accelerating. Carver listened without interrupting. Then he said, "We don't wait till Friday." Ada, on speaker, agreed immediately. The new plan formed in less than 15 minutes. We would let them push for the signing meeting they clearly wanted. But we would move the trap to Wednesday morning in the propagation office, where Caleb believed I still had authority to sign preliminary transfer documents and family support acknowledgments. The developer pressure would do the rest. If the bridge loan truly matured that week, Caleb would be too desperate to maintain the soft language for long. Nora, if pressed, would shift from concern to contempt. They always do when compassion stops generating obedience. The only thing I had to do was sit in my own chair, ask the right questions, and stay alive long enough for them to forget they were being watched. Wednesday arrived bright and cruel. One of those late April mornings that make everything look too innocent for what is about to happen under the light. The rain had rinsed the nursery clean. Plastic on the hoop houses shone silver. The gravel drive still held dampness underneath, but the top had already warmed. Hannah's climbers on the east trellis were just starting to leaf in earnest. The first pale blush roses in the memorial rows had not opened yet, but they were close. That mattered to me. Not symbolically. Practically. Because Ren had been right. They were trying to get the land gone before the roses bloomed. Nora brought the tea at 7. Blue mug. Steady hand. Soft voice. "You have a lot to process today," she said. "Let's keep you calm." I took the mug and looked directly at her. "Do you ever get tired of saying those kinds of things?" Just a flicker. That was all. Then the smile returned. "Only when people make care harder than it has to be." She left. I poured the tea into the evidence jar Erin had dropped off the night before and set the empty mug by the sink exactly where she would expect to find it later. At 8:10 Erin came through the supply entrance and fitted the tiny shirt mic while Ada kept watch at the lower bay. "Button line is live," he said. "Desk unit is live. Cabinet unit is live. Carver's team is in position. If Dalton Kessler arrives, all the better. If Pike arrives, say less." If your son starts posturing, let him. If anyone goes hands-on, use the line. I nodded. Say something ordinary. I looked at the little unit clipped under the placket seam and said, I spent 40 years worrying about aphids and propane and somehow ended up in a spy play about petunias. Aaron snorted. Signal is clear. By 9:30 the whole property felt different. You do not see surveillance if the people doing it are good. You feel it. A white van from a fake irrigation supply company sat near the lower drive where no van had any business sitting on a Wednesday. A silver sedan idled in the church lot across the road longer than normal. Miriam moved through the retail house with a brightness that would have looked ordinary to strangers and like a warning flare to anyone who knew her face. At 10:15 Caleb came upstairs carrying a leather folder. Not the manila office kind. The performative kind. He had showered. Changed into a blue button-down. Shaved too carefully. Men only dress that specifically for two things. Weddings and lies. Nora's bringing coffee for Mr. Kessler, he said. He's coming by to discuss options. Just a conversation. No pressure. I looked at the leather folder. No pressure usually doesn't require paper that nice. He ignored that. Dad, I need you to hear me before everyone gets here. There is a way through this that keeps the business stable, protects you from the parts you can't manage anymore, and gives Ren a future that isn't tied to a dying retail model and a bunch of sentimental acreage. But it only works if you stop turning every practical step into a moral insult. There was the pitch stripped clean. Not memory. Not safety. Not care. A dying retail model and sentimental acreage. I asked, what's the practical step today? He set the folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were 3 stacks. A family support agreement. A land disposition letter of intent. A petition acknowledgement form for emergency conservatorship review. The words sat there in black print under the sunlight coming through Hannah's rose field. All 3 pieces of the engine. Person. Money. Land. I looked up at him slowly. You want me to sign my own replacement and call it support? Caleb's nostrils flared. No. I want you to stop pretending you can still run everything the way you did before Mom died. That hit where he meant it to. I let the silence sit. He filled it. You haven't balanced the wholesale account in months. You forget vendor callbacks. You sleep through payroll. You get stuck in those rose books for hours like the plants are going to bring her back. You need structure. Interesting, I said. Because I seem to wake up most tired after Nora's tea. Almost like structure has ingredients. For the first time all morning, Caleb looked startled. Not guilty yet. Just off balance. Before he could answer, Nora came in with a tray. Coffee. Bottled water. A plate of bakery scones nobody was going to touch. She saw the papers on the desk and smiled in relief, as if the sight of them where I could see them meant the day was already leaning her way. Dalton Kessler arrived 2 minutes later. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would call a rose field underutilized. Mid-40s. Tan that never came from actual weather. Brown shoes too pointed for mud. One of those expensive quarter-zip pullovers men wear when they want to look relaxed while talking about millions in other people's property. He shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. Mr. Mercer. Dalton Kessler. We've spoken on the phone once or twice through Caleb. No, I said. You've spoken at me through my son. Nora made a small sound that tried to be a laugh and came out as a warning. Kessler smiled anyway and took the chair by the window without being invited. That told me almost everything I needed to know about him. The room settled. Coffee on the tray. Papers on the desk. The rose ledgers under my elbow. The recorders running. My son on my left, daughter-in-law on my right, developer across from me, all of them carrying the unspoken confidence of people who thought they had already narrowed the world down to only the choices they preferred. Kessler started first. I want to keep today informal. Nobody's forcing anything. The goal is simply to align expectations and reduce future strain. Align expectations. There it was again. People like him live on verbs that sound tidy and mean surrender. He went on. The market for specialty horticulture acreage is shifting. Retail patterns are changing. Distribution opportunities are rising. Caleb has shown me the numbers. There is a responsible path here that protects family interests while ensuring you, Ben, are not burdened by decisions you no longer need to carry. I asked, what if I still want to carry them? Kessler smiled like he had heard a child insist on driving the truck. Want and capacity are different categories. Nora's eyes flicked toward him sharply. Interesting. She did not want the word capacity said too early. Too naked. Too legal. Caleb leaned forward. This doesn't have to be a fight. Then why does it look like one? He exhaled hard. Because you've made everything harder since February. I tilted my head. Since February. That was not an accident. That was the month the wandering lie had been staged. The month the debt had matured enough to make them dangerous. I let that silence sit too. Then I asked the clean question Ada had wanted first. Caleb, when exactly did my grief become your land deal? No one moved. Kessler looked annoyed more than surprised, which meant he had been told to expect emotion but not clarity. Nora spoke before Caleb could. This is what happens when he gets fixated. One feeling becomes the whole room. I turned to her. How many nights did you drug me? That landed harder. Not because of the accusation. Because of the plainness. Nora's face did not lose all control. Just enough. What are you talking about? The purple tea. Kessler looked from one of us to the other, suddenly a great deal less comfortable about his chair. Caleb said, Dad, stop. No. It was the first real no I had said in that room in over a year. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clean. How many nights? Nora folded her hands in her lap. This was the version of her I had seen in waiting rooms and at funerals. The one who believed stillness looked like truth. I have only ever tried to help you sleep. By putting diphenhydramine and trazodone in a blue mug. Kessler went very still. He knew enough to recognize the problem in those words even if he did not yet know the evidence under them. Caleb's jaw clenched. You tested the tea. That was his mistake. Not a denial. Recognition. I looked at him. That would imply there was something to test. Kessler sat back slightly, the first tiny physical expression of a man discovering the room is not as private as he was promised. Caleb realized it too late. Nora cut in. Ben, this kind of paranoia is exactly why structure is necessary. You have not been yourself. You've been sleeping poorly, obsessing about old ledgers, speaking to staff in ways that confuse them. The tea was over-the-counter support. Nothing more. Support. Always support. I turned to the papers on the desk. Then why do the support forms end in land transfer? Kessler said, that is a very emotional way to describe a strategic disposition letter. No, I said. An emotional way would be asking whether you know what my wife planted in the West Trial house the year our grandson died. That shut the room up for a moment because none of them knew. I had not misspoken. We had lost a grandson. Caleb's first child, born premature and gone in 10 days. Hannah had planted white lisianthus and pale yellow stock in the West house that year because she said grief should be given one place to be beautiful on purpose. None of them remembered that. I did. That mattered. Nora tried again. This is not about memory tricks. No, I said. It's about whether you built a whole story around me being too weak to stop you. Caleb pushed back from his chair. Jesus Christ, Dad, why does everything have to be a trial with you? Kessler lifted a hand. Let's all slow down. No, I said. You can slow down. I've been living in your speed for a year. Then I asked the second clean question. When were you going to tell me the bridge loan on your Lebanon deal was in default? That hit Caleb like an electric current. Nora's eyes flashed toward him. Not in solidarity. In fury. Kessler swore under his breath. There it was. The money under the care language. The what? Nora said, too fast. Too sharp. That was useful too, because it told me some of the numbers Caleb had kept even from her. He rounded on her. Don't start this now. Kessler leaned forward. This is why I said we needed today controlled. I looked at him. Controlled by who? No answer. So I gave them the next piece. I know about Keystone Bridge Capital. I know about the cure amount. I know about the valuation. I know about the petition timing. And I know about the text where you said Pike language helps if Nora keeps me compliant through May. Kessler stood up. Not explosively. The way men do when they decide the meeting was misrepresented and they want to put their body closer to the exit without admitting fear. This meeting is over. Caleb snapped, no it isn't. That told me how desperate he really was. Because men protecting themselves leave. Men drowning double down. He turned back to me. You think you know something because you found a couple papers. You don't know what I'm holding together right now. I almost answered, I know exactly what you are holding together. My money, my land, and your own entitlement. But Ada had warned me not to decorate when plain truth would do. So I said, then tell me. His laugh broke at the edges. You want the truth. Fine. The truth is Mom died and you disappeared standing up. The place stopped functioning. Orders got missed. The houses looked tired. You floated through days like a ghost and then got offended when the rest of us acted like actual adults. I stepped in. I said, you stepped in with a broker. With numbers, he shot back. With reality. With the fact that this place is worth more to the living than to your memories. There it was. The thesis. The whole moral wound in one sentence. Worth more to the living than to your memories. Nora joined him then, maybe because the room had already crossed from polished manipulation into open contempt and she sensed she no longer had to perform concern. Do you know how exhausting this last year has been, she said. Trying to keep you fed, rested, presentable, trying to make appointments, cover for scenes you don't even remember making, answer staff questions, manage rent around your moods, explain to people why every practical conversation turns into some shrine to Hannah. Presentable. The word chilled me. Not supported. Not loved. Presentable. Like I was a display issue. I asked, is that why you staged the wandering? Caleb froze. Nora looked at him. Kessler looked between us and said quietly, what wandering? Good. Very good. The House of Cards was starting to force them to explain itself across audiences that had never fully compared notes. I said, the February night he opened the mudroom door so he could tell people I tried to leave in confusion. No one answered. Caleb's face had gone pale under the spring color. Kessler turned slowly toward him. You told me there was a documented wandering incident. Caleb snapped back, he was disoriented all winter. That is not what I asked. Nora stepped in too fast. This is not relevant. I laughed then. Not because anything was funny. Because relevance had finally walked into the room wearing real shoes. Yes, I said. It is. The next question mattered more than any of the others. Because underneath the land, the debt, the tea, and the language sat a child. I turned to Nora. How many times were you going to use Ren to keep me quiet? For the first time something ugly crossed her face unguarded. Not guilt. Annoyance. Don't drag her into this. She's already in it. She is protected from it. Protected. I repeated. By hearing her grandfather gets to stop making choices. By hearing her father say the land has to be gone before the roses bloom. By being told not to say sail around me because it makes me have episodes. Is that protection? Kessler looked sick now. Good. He should have. Caleb said, Ren would have been fine once we were out. There it was. Out. Not stable. Not secure. Out. Out where? He didn't answer. Nora did, sharp as a blade. In Florida, if you want every ugly detail. Better schools. Better weather. Better life. Better than this place where everyone worships compost and grief and acts like a field of roses is more sacred than an actual child's future. I looked at her for a long second. Then I said, so that was the plan. Drug me, declare me unfit, sell Hannah's land, and fly south before Ren got old enough to understand what you took. Don't make it sound insane, she said. You make everything sound insane when it's just difficult. That sentence lives with me. Because that is the whole private theology of abusers. If the victim names the thing clearly, the victim is dramatic. If the abuser renames it as difficult, the world relaxes. I asked the last clean question. Was there ever a version of this where you left me any real choice? Caleb answered immediately. Yes. Early on. Then you got stubborn. Not confusion. Not decline. Stubborn. He had said it. Not because he forgot himself. Because he believed his logic now outweighed the danger of plain speech. Kessler said, very quietly, I need to leave. Caleb rounded on him. No, you need to stay and finish what you started. Kessler actually took a step back. I'm not finishing anything in a room where people are talking about drugged tea and staged cognitive incidents. Nora stood too. No one drugged anyone. For God's sake. He got sleepy. That's all. I looked at her. Then why did I sign faster? Silence. That was the line Ren had given me. The whole room seemed to hear her voice in it even though they did not know where the words came from. Nora's face changed. Not shame. Recognition that the child had spoken. She whispered, what did Ren tell you? There it was. Not know. Never know. What did Ren tell you? Caleb said, she's 9. She doesn't know what she hears. I answered, she knows what a blue mug means. His eyes flicked toward the sink. Toward the mug. Toward my desk. Toward me. And that was the moment he understood the room had tilted away from him. He lunged for the leather folder. Not because paper could save him. Because men in collapse still reach for the props that made them feel powerful 15 minutes earlier. He yanked the conservatorship acknowledgement out, shoved it toward me, and said through clenched teeth, sign it. Right now. Before you make this worse. There it is, I said softly. What? The truth. Not safety. Not support. Sign it before you make this worse. He slammed his palm on the desk so hard the coffee cup rattled. You have no idea what worse is. Try me. His voice went low and flat. If this deal dies, Keystone comes through me. Then through the house. Then through everything. Ren loses school. We lose the property. The state crawls through every account. You think that ends with your little rose books and your noble old man routine intact. It doesn't. It ends with everybody burned. So yes, sign the damn paper and let adults clean up what your grief made impossible. That was it. Everything. Debt. Pressure. Blame. The belief that my grief had created his fraud and therefore obliged me to absorb its cost. I looked at him and said, "You used your mother's death like a market window." He grabbed my shirt. Hard. Fast. The mic tugged against the seam. Chair legs scraped. Nora shouted his name. Kessler swore and backed toward the door. And I said the line. Ren deserves better than this. Everything moved at once. The door flew open so hard it hit the wall. Carver first. Then 2 county officers in plain clothes. Then Ada behind them with her phone up and fury on her face so cold it might as well have been made of steel. "Hands off him now," Carver said. Caleb spun so fast he lost his grip on my shirt and stumbled into the desk. The recorder under the lip hit the floor. Kessler put both hands up immediately, which told me more about his innocence than any speech would have. Nora froze for half a second, then pointed at me and said the most self-destroying sentence of her life. He was supposed to be asleep by now. Carver stared at her. Then at the blue mug. Then back at her. "Thank you," he said. "That helps." They took Caleb first. He fought just enough to confirm the cuffs were deserved and not enough to feel brave later. One officer got his arm behind his back. The other pinned him to the wall by the seed rack while Carver read enough of the warning to satisfy procedure. Nora started crying before anyone touched her. Not grief crying. Anger crying. The kind that says this was not supposed to happen to me. Ada stepped into the room fully then and said, "You should save the performance. The tea tested dirty." That shut Nora up long enough for the second set of cuffs. Kessler kept saying, "I was told this was a family coordination meeting. I was told this was approved." Carver looked at him and said, "Then you may want to explain your texts about keeping him compliant through May before the district attorney decides how charitable your misunderstanding was." Kessler went gray. They searched the room. Photographed the documents. Bagged the mugs. Took the folders. Took the recorder. Took my shirt for evidence after Aaron confirmed the wire line had stayed intact. Miriam arrived at the door halfway through it all and saw Nora in cuffs and Caleb with his face against my seed rack and simply said, "About time." No one disagreed. Then came the worst moment. Not the arrests. Not the shouting. Not even seeing my son handcuffed in the room where he had tried to declare me obsolete. The worst moment was hearing Ren's voice from outside. She had come up the gravel path early from school because Nora was supposed to pick her up for a dentist appointment and had forgotten the time in the chaos. She stood in the doorway with her backpack on and her eyes too wide and saw enough to know her world had just broken in public. Every adult in that room stopped. Carver lowered his voice instantly. Ada turned. I moved first. I stepped around the officers, around the papers, around the cuffed people who had built a year out of my confusion, and knelt in front of my granddaughter. "It's all right," I said. Which was not true and was still the right thing to say first. She looked past me at Nora. "Mom." Nora burst into fresh tears. Not because of the child. Because of the optics of the child. I saw that clearly then and hated her for it in a new way. Ada came beside me and said, "Ren, sweetheart, you're coming with me for a little while, okay? Your grandpa is okay. You are okay. The adults are handling something important." Ren looked at me. Only me. That was one of the few clean gifts that day gave me. Whatever else they had done to the house, they had not managed to train her away from knowing where safety actually stood. I said, "Go with Ada. I'll see you tonight." She nodded once and let Ada take her hand. Caleb started saying her name. Not loudly. Desperately. Like fatherhood could be restored by tone alone. She did not turn. That silence will outlive me. By 1:30 the propagation room was empty except for me, Carver, and the smell of spilled coffee and disturbed paper. The blue mug sat in an evidence bag on the desk. The conservatorship papers were gone. The leather folder was gone. The room looked both wrecked and cleaner than it had in months. Carver sat across from me and said, "You did well." I laughed once. I got grabbed in my own office. You got them to show the structure under pressure. That matters. He opened his notebook. We'll be moving quickly. Search warrants on the den office, devices, kitchen medication storage, email accounts tied to the acquisition, financial records, Pike's intake notes, Kessler's communications, and the Lebanon partnership documents if they intersect. You and Ms. Sinclair did the hard part. Now we make it boring. Boring. The greatest compliment law can give a terrible truth is to make its handling procedural. I asked the only question that really mattered in that moment. Ren. Carver nodded. Child services will do the formal part because both parents are in custody and we're dealing with potential poisoning and coercive exploitation in the home. Ms. Sinclair is already coordinating temporary placement. Given the circumstances and your standing, I don't expect the transition away from you unless something in the home makes that impossible. The relief that hit me then did not feel noble. It felt animal. Good. Mine. Alive. The statement interview at the county annex lasted 4 hours. Ada sat beside me for most of it. Carver asked questions. Another detective typed. Aaron managed the audio chain and laid out print photos when dates mattered. I walked them through Hannah's illness, the move, the tea, the staged wandering, the paperwork, the debts, Ren's warning, Pike's language, the easement, the trust, the meeting, the grab. About halfway through Carver set a new photograph in front of me. It was the kitchen drawer from the farmhouse. Inside sat 3 pill organizers, 2 unmarked amber bottles, a bag of crushed lavender tea blend in a freezer pouch, and a prescription bottle with the label soaked off. Lab tech found it in the spice basket, he said. Trazodone tablets. Not prescribed to you. Belonging originally to a former resident at Nora's assisted living facility, according to the refill number. I stared at the photo. Carver continued. We also found draft symptom logs in Nora's laptop. Dated entries. Sleep disturbance. Agitation. Repetitive fixation on deceased spouse. Financial confusion. Resistance to care. Wandering impulse. Most appear to have been created in blocks and backdated. He slid another page. Then another. The engine. There it was on paper. Not just emotional. Administered. Structured. Monetized. The officers searched Caleb's den office at the farmhouse and found more than I had guessed. A school brochure from Naples, Florida. A draft apartment lease reservation paid with a corporate card. An email chain about preliminary demolition salvage rights for the propagation building and old greenhouse steel contingent upon closing. And the worst one of all. A typed note to self on Caleb's computer that read. Once old man in facility, liquidate non-sentimental inventory first. Non-sentimental inventory. Hannah's roses. Miriam's perennial stock. The Christmas cactus mother plants we had kept going from Hannah's grandmother's cuttings. The trial beds. The benches. The soil. The whole living record of our marriage reduced to inventory triage language written by our own son. When Carver read that line aloud, I did not say anything for a long time. Then I asked if I could have water. Not because I was thirsty. Because grief, even when mixed with fury, still sometimes needs the dignity of interruption. That first night back at the farmhouse without Caleb and Nora should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt exposed. The house was too quiet again, but not with Hannah's absence. With vacancy. There were still Nora's shoes by the back bench. Caleb's jacket over a chair. Wren's lunchbox on the kitchen counter because she had forgotten it in the rush. The evidence team had left the house functional but disturbed. Drawer liners out. Desk contents boxed. Labels on cabinet doors. A strip of evidence tape across the pantry shelf where the tea had been kept. Ada brought Wren over just after 7. She had changed her clothes at Ada's house and washed her face, but her eyes looked older than they had that morning. She stood in the mudroom holding her backpack with both straps in both hands. I bent down and opened my arms. She came into them so hard it almost knocked me back. Did I make it happen? She whispered into my shirt. That question is why adults who use children as leverage should never know peace. Because a child will always try to place herself inside the blast radius and decide whether she caused it. No, I said immediately. You told the truth. That is not the same thing. She stayed pressed against me a long time. Later, over plain spaghetti and butter because neither of us had the stomach for more, she asked where her parents were. I told her the simplest true version. They are somewhere people go when grown-ups have done dangerous things and other grown-ups need to figure out what happened. She thought about that and then asked, dangerous like fire? Yes, I said. But a different kind. She nodded. Children accept incomplete truth better than adults do sometimes, as long as the person speaking is not obviously hiding from it. Ada stayed till 10. Before she left she stood at the sink looking out toward the rose field and said, for what it's worth, Hannah would be furious and proud in equal measure. I said, that sounds exhausting. Ada nodded. She contained multitudes. After Wren went to sleep in the upstairs guest room, I walked alone out to the propagation building. The room above it was dark. Empty. Mine and not mine. The desk still held a faint ring where the coffee had spilled during the arrest. One chair was tipped slightly wrong from the scramble. The window looked out over Hannah's rose under moonlight. I stood there for a long time with no plan, no speech, no grand conclusion. Just a tired old man in a room that had finally stopped being a place where decisions were handed down to him. Then I picked up the blue mug the crime scene unit had left behind after bagging the actual evidence mug and carried it down the back steps to the dumpster. I did not throw it hard. That would have been satisfying for 1 second and wasteful for the rest. I just let it drop. Ceramic on metal. A small ordinary sound. The kind quiet justice often makes. The first 48 hours after an abusive structure breaks are strange. People imagine relief arrives whole. It doesn't. Relief arrives mixed with paperwork, shock, guilt, bad sleep, unfamiliar silence, and the sudden discovery that freedom also requires logistics. Wren needed clothes for school. The nursery still had orders to fill. The houses still needed venting and watering. Payroll still ran Friday. Grief did not pause because fraud had finally revealed itself. Neither did petunias. That, more than anything, grounded me. Thursday morning I was out in greenhouse 2 by 6:30, checking soil moisture with Miriam and reprogramming the irrigation cycle. Caleb had changed in one of his efficiency moods. The houses smelled like damp peat, tomato foliage, and the clean mineral scent that rises when sunlight hits wet benches after rain. For the first time in over a year, nobody interrupted me to ask whether I should be making that decision. Miriam handed me a clipboard and said, "You're back." I looked at her. "Am I?" She shrugged. "Not all the way. But enough to notice the west hose manifold still leaking. That's a start. That was the kindest thing anyone said to me that week. Carver called just after 9. They processed the devices, he said. You're going to want to sit down for part of this. I was standing in the potting shed with dirt on my hands. I'm already living in the story. Just tell me. He did. Nora's laptop contained 6 months of draft symptom narratives, all copied from each other with only dates and intensifiers changed. Increasing executive strain. Escalating fixation. Unsafe autonomy. Financial impulsivity. Resistance to support. Every phrase designed to sound medically adjacent without crossing into something a real clinician would want under oath. There were also emails. Not just to Pike. To an admissions director at Willow Glen Memory Residence in Chester County. Subject line, pre-placement inquiry for widowed male, horticultural asset background, probable vascular cognitive decline, family cooperative. Family cooperative. I nearly dropped the phone. They had already picked a place. Carver kept going. The inquiry asked specifically about private pay transition before formal long-term placement. There's a note attached from Nora asking whether personal belongings can be limited early to reduce agitation. I did sit down then. On an overturned crate of vermiculite bags in the potting shed with the smell of wet soil all around me and sunlight striping through the slats. Limit personal belongings to reduce agitation. That was what the room above propagation had been. A rehearsal. A small first version of the larger cage. Anything else? I asked. Carver was quiet one beat. Yes. That one word told me it would be ugly. We pulled a message thread between Nora and Pike. He's been more involved than he admitted. Not medically, which may help us later because he seems to know where the legal boundaries are and step right to them without crossing cleanly. But he coached language. He suggested terms like burdened decisional bandwidth, grief-linked perseveration, and relational agitation around property topics. Nora used them in the logs almost verbatim. The whole thing was so professional in miniature. Not a villain twirling anything. Just educated people building a man into paperwork. And Pike. He lawyered up by noon yesterday. Of course he did. Kessler did not. That was Friday's surprise. Developers are brave right up until they discover their texts might be read aloud in a room with microphones. By Friday afternoon Dalton Kessler was in a proffer meeting through counsel trying very hard to transform himself from participant into witness. He told the investigators what I had already suspected and a few things I had not. Caleb had been pitching my back acreage for 10 months, first informally, then through partial valuation packets, then through a preliminary memorandum promising clean family control by the end of second quarter. Kessler had expressed concern about title complexity and owner resistance. Caleb reassured him by saying I was entering a manageable decline phase and that family authority would formalize soon. That phrase mattered. Manageable decline phase. It was the language of a son describing his father as a timing issue. Kessler also confirmed something Ada had guessed but could not prove. He had advanced Caleb $75,000 personally in January against the expectation of a priority acquisition window once the conservatorship petition cleared and the acreage was separated from nursery operations. Not all the debt. Just enough to tighten the noose. Bridge money for the bridge money. That is how greed breeds. In smaller, uglier offspring. Ada called that evening with another update. Willow Glen isn't the only place, she said. There's a second inquiry to Brookmere Transitional Residence. Cheaper, more restrictive, less oversight, and a notation that says, client responds to containment when child contact is regulated. I closed my eyes. Read that again. She did. Client responds to containment when child contact is regulated. This is what people mean when they say abuse becomes procedural. At some point the cruelty no longer needs heat. It can be typed. Child Services placed Ren with me temporarily by the end of the week. Not permanently. Not yet. Courts do not move because morality is obvious. They move because documents are lined up, homes are inspected, school continuity is assessed, and everyone involved pretends not to understand that a little girl can tell them more in one scared sentence than a binder of evaluations ever will. The caseworker, Sonia Patel, came through the farmhouse Friday afternoon with a tablet, kind eyes, and the sort of practical gentleness that comes from doing work no one thanks you for correctly. She walked the house. Opened cabinets. Checked the guest room where Ren had been sleeping. Asked about meals, school transportation, medication storage, firearms, routines, support network. Not once did she speak to me like I was heroic. Bless her for that. Heroism is a terrible substitute for competence. At the end she sat at the kitchen table while Ren colored beside the sugar bowl and asked, "Can you provide consistent care for your granddaughter while this case moves?" Yes. Who helps if you're sick? Ada. Miriam. The pastor's wife if I had to. 2 neighbor women who would happily run this house by force if they thought I was trying to martyr myself. Patel looked up. That sounded specific. It is. She nodded and typed. Then she asked Ren, "Do you feel safe here with Grandpa?" Ren kept coloring for another few seconds. Then she said, "Here I get to say things the first time." Patel stopped typing. So did I. That sentence still gets me. Because adults spend so much time hunting for legal precision that we sometimes miss the exact clarity children still carry. Here I get to say things the first time. That is not just safety. That is freedom. The preliminary hearing on temporary protective orders happened 12 days after the arrests. I wore the same charcoal jacket I had worn to Hannah's memorial service because I had no interest in buying a special outfit for family collapse. Caleb appeared by video from county detention because the assaultive grab during the meeting, the poisoning allegation, and the financial exploitation exposure had convinced the magistrate he did not yet deserve the visual advantage of a tie in a courtroom. Nora was there in person because her counsel argued she was the primary parent and had never physically restrained me. It was an ambitious argument in a room where the T analysis already existed. Ada handled most of it. She moved through the record with the smooth cruelty of a woman whose respect for you depends entirely on whether you are lying. She introduced the independent neuropsych report. The T-screen. The staged wandering footage. The draft symptom logs. The admissions inquiries. The land valuation timeline. The messages about keeping me compliant through May. Then she played 2 clips from the Wednesday meeting. First Caleb. If this deal dies, Keystone comes through me. Then through the house. Then through everything. So yes, sign the damn paper and let adults clean up what your grief made impossible. Then Nora. He was supposed to be asleep by now. No theatrical music. No dramatic zoom. Just human beings hearing their own voices stripped of context because context had been the weapon they used to begin with. The judge, a woman with short silver hair and an expression like she had seen every possible species of family ugliness already, took her glasses off when the second clip ended. Then she looked directly at Nora and said, "Counselor, if your client has an innocent explanation for why the elderly man in her care was expected to be asleep during the execution of documents affecting his liberty and property, I suggest you bring it now and not after lunch." The innocent explanation did not exist. Temporary orders were entered that day. No parental custody to Caleb or Nora pending full hearing. No contact with me outside counsel. No access to nursery property. No authority over any Mercer business or trust assets. Independent guardian ad litem for Ren. Protective supervision on the farmhouse until case resolution. It was not victory. But it was breath. The weeks between that hearing and the indictment phase were some of the most difficult of my life for reasons people rarely talk about. Justice, before it turns public, is mostly administrative waiting. Meanwhile, life still wants feeding. Ren still needed lunches packed. Her science project still needed poster board. The petunia basket still needed deadheading. Wholesale invoices still arrived with no sympathy for your domestic implosion. Miriam still had seasonal hires asking whether Memorial Day discounts would run like usual. And grief, now mixed with rage and delayed humiliation, came whenever it wanted. Sometimes it came while I was doing something grand and obvious, like standing in the propagation room looking at the empty chair where Caleb had once held seedlings as a boy. Sometimes it came while I was rinsing a spoon. The stupid little moments are the ones that get you. One afternoon in May I found Hannah's handwriting on the back of an old seed order note tucked in a drawer. If Ben ever agrees to sell roses for warehouse space, assume concussion. I laughed so hard I cried. Ren found me like that, sitting on the pantry floor with the note in one hand and tears on my face. She came and sat beside me without asking questions. After a minute she said, "Grandma still sounds bossy." "Yes," I said. That was one of her hobbies. She nodded solemnly. "Good." Then she took the note, read it again, and said, "Can we put this in the kitchen?" We did. Right on the refrigerator under a carrot magnet. Humor is not the opposite of pain in a house like ours. It is ventilation. The indictments landed in late June. Commonwealth versus Caleb Mercer. Commonwealth versus Nora Mercer. Related fraud and conspiracy exposure for Dalton Kessler. Separate licensing and criminal referral review for Dr. Leland Pike. The charge list was long enough to stop sounding real halfway through. Financial exploitation of an older adult. Attempted unlawful restraint through fraudulent incapacity process. Assault. Forgery-related offenses on backdated care records and property paperwork. Poisoning or adulteration exposure pending lab correlation. Conspiracy counts. Child endangerment through coercive emotional leverage in the home. I read them at the kitchen table while the first true flush of Hannah's memorial roses opened outside the window. Ren was drawing on the far end of the table, tongue pressed between her teeth the way Hannah used to when labeling flats. She looked up and asked, "Is that bad news or good news?" I thought for a second. Then I said, "It's the kind of news that hurts first and helps later." She accepted that. Children understand timing better than adults think. Caleb's lawyer built his defense exactly the way men like Caleb always do. Pressure made me do it. Dad was difficult. Nora handled the care side. The tea was just sleep aid. The land was a business necessity. The conservatorship was for his safety. The grab was an emotional moment, not an assault. He had been trying to keep everything from collapsing. I do not know whether he ever truly hurt himself. Because there is a species of selfishness that can metabolize any cruelty as management if the person committing it is frightened enough by consequences. Nora's strategy was colder. She shifted blame elegantly. Caleb was volatile. Caleb drove the land deal. She only used the tea because I was not sleeping. She only drafted notes because Pike wanted patterns. She only explored facilities because Caleb told her I would eventually need them. She had been trying to keep Ren stable. It almost worked in places. That is what made her more dangerous than Caleb. Caleb broke hot. Nora broke useful. What neither of them understood was that the room above propagation had left a record in more than documents. It had left a pattern in Ren. The guardian ad litem did not use her as a weapon. Thank God. No child deserves to become a blunt instrument in adult retribution. But a forensic child interviewer gathered enough carefully that the court understood the house had organized itself around silence. The blue mug. The phrase "do good this week." The warning not to use certain words around Grandpa. The belief that saying the wrong thing made grown-ups angry. And the line about not having to make choices anymore. Those things matter because juries can listen to adults lie to each other for weeks. Then a child says one clean sentence and the whole structure loses oxygen. We turned the propagation room back into a real office that summer. Not because I was ready. Because avoiding it would have let them keep one more piece of ground in my head. Miriam and I stripped the room in stages. First the bed. Then the thin lamp Nora had chosen. Then the bland beige curtains. Then the little organizer bins she had labeled with pills, socks, forms, reminders, as if my whole life were a drawer unit waiting to be civilized. I thought I would feel triumphant. Mostly I felt tired. Until Wren carried up a cardboard box of seed packets and asked, "Can this be the drawing table now?" That changed it. We put the desk by the east window. Built shelves where the dresser had been. Moved Hannah's rose ledgers into the top cabinet. Put Wren's art bin in the lower one. Hung a corkboard for supplier notes and school drawings side by side because I had become old enough to understand that useful rooms should serve life, not just work. By August the space no longer felt like the waiting room for my own erasure. It felt like a second office. Still imperfect. Still windy at the seams. But ours. The trial did not start until November. That surprised me less than it once would have. Courts have their own weather. Long slow pressure systems and then sudden violent days. By then Wren was settled into 4th grade in Liddites and living with me under extended temporary guardianship. Sonia Patel visited monthly. Ada had become half attorney, half aunt, half tactical grandmother, which is too many halves but suited her anyway. Miriam had taken over more of the nursery books than she wanted and less than she deserved credit for. I had also learned something I did not know at 71. Children who have lived under atmospheric fear do not heal in speeches. They heal in repetition. Breakfast happening when it is supposed to happen. Nobody lowering their voice when they see you walk into the room. A grown-up answering a direct question with a direct answer. Doors that stay unlocked. School pickup on time. Socks paired. Homework at the same table every night. No blue mugs. That last one was Wren's rule. We took every blue mug in the house, boxed them, and donated them to the church rummage sale without discussion. At the trial, the prosecution's theory was simple enough for ordinary people and precise enough for law. Caleb and Nora Mercer, under pressure from Caleb's debt and motivated by the commercial value of family land, used chemical sedation, false concern narratives, manipulated medical language, and the gradual erosion of autonomy to position Benjamin Mercer as an incapacitated older adult, then attempted to convert that position into conservatorship, land transfer, and residential removal while leveraging his granddaughter's access and emotional security as tools of compliance. That is not a television sentence. That is a courtroom sentence. It turned my ruined year into structure the law could hold. I was the first witness after chain of custody and scene evidence. Walking to the stand, I did not feel brave. I felt annoyed. Annoyed that strangers would now know the dimensions of my room. Annoyed that I would have to explain what it felt like to mistrust a mug in my own house. Annoyed that my son sat at the defense table in a suit Ada helped his public defender pressure out of some relative I did not know. Annoyed, above all, that Hannah was not there to lean back in the gallery and glare holes through everyone's excuses. The prosecutor, Elena Marsh, was smart enough not to make me sound noble. She kept it clean. What happened after your wife died? Who moved in? What changed first? How often was the tea brought? What did the room above propagation become? What authority documents did you sign? What did you later discover about your competence? What did you hear your son say on the phone? What did your granddaughter tell you? What happened on Wednesday? She walked the jury through it the same way Ada had built the board. Person. Money. Narrative. Land. When Marsh introduced the photograph of the blue mug in evidence bag plastic, I heard one juror inhale sharply. Good. Let them feel how ordinary evil can look. The defense went after Grief first. Of course they did. Mr. Mercer, isn't it true you were deeply depressed after your wife's death? Yes. Isn't it true you had trouble sleeping, concentrating, and managing ordinary tasks? Yes. Isn't it true you accepted support from your son and daughter-in-law because you needed it? Yes. Then came the pivot. So is it possible that what you now call coercion was simply support you resented once business disagreements arose? I looked at the juror who had reacted to the mug, then back at the lawyer. No, I said. Support doesn't need me sleepy to sign faster. Even the judge looked up at that. The defense never really recovered. Miriam was excellent. Not flashy. Just devastatingly practical. She explained how the nursery ran when Hannah was alive, how I ran it after, what actual confusion would have looked like in the business, and how what she observed instead was a man whose clarity tracked suspiciously with whether or not he finished a drink his daughter-in-law controlled. Then she described the staged wandering footage. Then the copied financial records. Then the fact that Caleb kept speaking about the acreage as value extraction while I still made accurate cultivation calls no cognitively failing owner could have improvised under retail season pressure. The prosecutor asked, in your opinion as the nursery operations manager, was Benjamin Mercer incapable of understanding his business? Miriam answered, no. He was being managed like someone they wanted other people to underestimate. That line landed. Dr. Shah's testimony did what it needed to do. Competent. No evidence of dementia. Sedation likely impaired function episodically. Grief does not equal incapacity. She explained how outside family reports can distort clinical impressions if the clinician relies on them too heavily. Pike, under subpoena, tried to thread the needle and ended up hanging himself on jargon. He said he had never diagnosed dementia, never intended his recommendations to authorize guardianship, and never approved chemical sedation. Under cross, Elena Marsh walked him through his email phrases next to Nora's symptom logs. The jury watched him realize in real time that soft language becomes hard evidence when printed beside a woman's notes about keeping an older man compliant through May. Kessler testified under cooperation. I did not enjoy seeing him try on conscience. But he was useful. He admitted the $75,000 advance. The timelines. The pressure. The assumption that family authority would soon be formalized. The understanding that once that happened, the protected rows section would likely be removed or overridden. Ada later whispered that the moment he said overridden, 3 jurors visibly disliked him in the way that lasts through deliberation. Good. Some words deserve consequences. Nora's testimony was the worst part for me. Not because I feared her. Because of how calmly she lied when survival still seemed available. She cried twice. Never at the right moments. She said she had loved me like a father. Said the tea was an herbal sleep blend plus over-the-counter support for rest. Said the trazodone must have been contamination from the facility where she worked. Said Ren misunderstood adult conversations. Said the memory residence inquiries were exploratory because caregiving families research options all the time. Then Elena Marsh put one of Nora's own notes on the screen. Client responds to containment when child contact is regulated. Marsh asked, who is the client? Nora said, Benjamin. And what does containment mean in this note? Nora hesitated. Boundary support. Marsh did not blink. And what does child contact regulated mean? Nora's mouth tightened. It means we limited emotionally activating circumstances. Marsh picked up another exhibit. The Wednesday recording. The line about Florida. The line about me being presentable. The line about me being supposed to be asleep by now. Then Marsh asked, "Mrs. Mercer, would you like to try boundary support again, or should the jury use your own words instead?" Nora did not answer. That silence convicted her more than the crying ever could. Caleb was last. He should not have testified. Any competent lawyer would have advised against it. But Caleb had inherited enough of me to believe he could fix a room if he finally got to speak plainly, and enough of himself to think plain speech would help him. He admitted the debt. He admitted the acquisition pressure. He admitted he believed the nursery could not survive another 3 years under my control. He admitted he saw the land as the only way out. He did not admit poisoning. He did not admit wanting me hurt. He said the tea was Nora's area. He said the room above propagation had been for my comfort. He said the grab on Wednesday was panic. Then Elena Marsh asked him the one question I saw coming and still felt like a blade. "When your father asked if there had ever been a version of this where you left him a real choice, why didn't you answer no?" Caleb stared at her. Then said, "Because there was a version early on." Marsh stepped closer. "The version where he signed faster after the tea." He said nothing. "The version where you staged wandering." Nothing. "The version where your daughter was told not to say sail around him because it would make him have episodes." Still nothing. "The version where he was expected to be asleep by the time the paperwork arrived." No answer. The court reporter keys sounded louder than usual in the silence. Then Marsh asked the question that finished him. "Mr. Mercer, what did you mean when you said your father was the only obstacle?" Caleb closed his eyes once. When he opened them he looked older than 71 feels. "I meant he could stop the land deal." There are moments in a courtroom where an entire case turns from contested narrative into simple arithmetic. That was one of them. Obstacle. Land deal. Not confusion. Not safety. Not care. Obstacle. The verdict came after 1 day of deliberation. Guilty on the major exploitation counts. Guilty on the restraint-related fraud structure. Guilty on assault for Caleb. Guilty on poisoning and falsified care documentation for Nora. Guilty on conspiracy elements tying both of them to the attempted conservatorship and land transfer scheme. Kessler took a reduced fraud plea under cooperation. Pike lost his license pending criminal disposition and later took an administrative plea that kept him out of prison and out of practice, which I found too merciful and still more than his conscience deserved. When the foreperson read the last guilty, I did not feel triumph. I felt tired. Then Ren, sitting in the back beside Ada and Sonia Patel, reached out and put her hand on my sleeve. That was the first thing that felt real. Sentencing took place 6 weeks later under a gray December sky that made the courthouse windows look like dull metal. I wore the same charcoal jacket again because by then it had become less clothing than witness. Ren did not attend. That was deliberate. Children should not have to watch the state put years on their parents even when the parents spent those years earning it. Sonia Patel agreed. Ada agreed. I agreed in the deep selfish way older people sometimes do when we want to spare a child the sight we ourselves are about to carry forever. The judge was the same silver-haired woman from the temporary orders hearing. She had read everything by then. Every log, every message, every valuation, every note about containment, every transcript line where ordinary family words had fallen away and the machinery underneath had shown its teeth. She started with Caleb. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "what troubles this court most is not that you were under financial pressure. Financial pressure is common. Nor is it that you desired control over family assets. Sadly, that too is common. What troubles this court is that you chose to solve those pressures by converting your father's grief into an instrument. You did not care for a vulnerable parent. You cultivated vulnerability where it benefited you." No one moved. Caleb stood beside his lawyer in county beige and stared at a point just past the judge's shoulder. She continued. You use staged incidents, manipulated narratives, false support language, intimidation, and ultimately forced to position your father as incapable of resisting the transfer of liberty and property. The law views this not as a family misunderstanding but as exploitation. Then she sentenced him. 8 to 12 years on the lead exploitation and conspiracy counts. A concurrent term on the assault. Restitution tied to diverted funds, legal costs, and forensic accounting recovery. No contact with me except through counsel and only if court approved for asset issues. Mandatory review on any future parental contact petition. Caleb looked at me then. That was the first time he had looked directly at me in weeks. Not like a son. Not like a child who had suddenly understood what he had done. Like a man still trying to see whether some private channel remained open where blood could outrank verdict. It did not. Nora's sentencing came after. The judge's language with her was different. Colder. Mrs. Mercer, you specialized in the appearance of care. That is what distinguishes your conduct from ordinary neglect or anger. You knew the language that reassures institutions. You knew the rhythms of concern, the paperwork, the vocabulary of transition and burden and support. You used those tools not to protect, but to conceal. You chemically suppressed an older adult. You documented him into a shape useful to your purposes. You used a child's access to her grandfather as leverage. There is sophistication here, not confusion. Sophistication. That word fit her better than any other ever had. Nora received 6 to 9 years on the primary counts, plus licensing bars, restitution liability, and child endangerment findings that would shadow every future custody argument she ever tried to make. She cried at sentencing the way she had cried at trial. Too late. Too selectively. As if tears were still a card she could play when the hand had already been read. The surprise was not the prison time. It was what happened after court adjourned. As the deputies moved in to take them through the side door, Caleb spoke. Not to his lawyer. Not to the judge. To me. Dad. Just that one word. The bailiff paused because human beings still sometimes make room for blood even after the law is done speaking. Caleb swallowed hard. Then he said, I did not think it would go that far. For a split second the old reflex rose in me. The reflex to comfort. To soften. To interpret the child under the man. Then I remembered the blue mug. The staged wandering. The note about non-sentimental inventory. The line about me being the only obstacle. Ren asking whether she made it happen. I looked at him and said the truest thing I had. That was the whole problem. Then the deputy led him away. Nora turned too, eyes wet, and said, Please tell Ren I never meant to scare her. I did not answer. Because whether she meant to scare Ren was one of the least interesting parts of what she had done. The guardianship hearing for Ren took another 4 months. Family court is slower than ordinary pain and faster than healing. It wants categories before life has had time to become one. Permanent guardianship petitions. Capacity reviews. Psychological recommendations. School letters. Home studies. Statements from child specialists. Every part of the process both necessary and indecent in its own way. Nora's lawyer tried to preserve maternal contact through letters and supervised review. Caleb's lawyer argued that prison made his current unfitness temporary. The guardian ad litem recommended primary placement with me and structured therapeutic transition only if future professionals believed it served Ren rather than merely preserving adult hopes. I learned to sit in fluorescent waiting rooms holding a folder full of papers that summarized my life in nouns I would never have chosen. Petitioner. Maternal risk context. Household stability. Intergenerational attachment. Commercial property continuity. Children get turned into categories by systems trying to help them. Adults do too. The order became final in early April. Primary permanent guardianship to me. Educational and residential authority to me. Therapeutically supervised written contact only with Nora for the first year and no direct physical contact absent clinical recommendation. No direct contact with Caleb while incarcerated unless Ren initiated through therapeutic channels later. The judge wrote one line into the order that made me unexpectedly emotional. Continuity of safe routine shall be prioritized over restoration of biological expectations. I asked Ada afterward what exactly that meant in ordinary language. She said, "It means the court finally understands that being related to a child is not the same thing as being safe for her." That spring we rebuilt the nursery in public and private ways. Publicly, customers returned the way they always do if you survive winter and open the doors on time. People bought hanging baskets. Argued about shade perennials. Asked whether the rumor about the county and the greenhouse had been true. Some of them knew enough to ask gently. Some knew almost nothing and wanted the thrill version. I learned to answer with one short sentence. We had family legal trouble. The nursery is staying exactly where it belongs. That was enough. Privately, we changed more. The downstairs den became Ren's study room and sewing corner because she had developed a strange fierce interest in learning how to hem things after watching Ada take in a courthouse skirt by hand during one of the long waiting afternoons. The propagation office upstairs became what she had first named it by accident. The drawing table room. We kept the desk by the east window. Added a low bookcase. Painted the walls a soft warm white that made the room feel larger in winter. Hung Hannah's old botanical prints instead of the bland beige curtains Nora had chosen. Ren taped one of her own drawings above the bookshelf. It showed the greenhouse, the farmhouse, the roses, me in a ridiculous sun hat she insisted made me look kinder, and her beside me holding pruning shears that were twice the size of her arm. Across the top she had written, "Nothing gets put to sleep here." That line almost undid me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was precise. Children speak toward the wound if you let them. The nursery's first full season without the engine of manipulation felt both smaller and bigger than before. Smaller because I was older now and no longer interested in pretending I could outwork entropy on principle. Bigger because so much of my attention was no longer being spent deciphering the house. I hired an additional seasonal manager so Miriam could stop doing the work of 3 adults and a ghost. We cut 2 low margin lines Hannah never actually liked and expanded our heirloom rose and native perennial stock because the conservation easement had unexpectedly generated local support once word got out that the back acreage would remain horticultural. A garden club from Lancaster offered volunteer labor for the memorial rose. A school horticulture class asked if they could do internships. A local paper ran a feature about preserving living family businesses from speculative development, carefully avoiding most of the criminal details and therefore, for once, making the better editorial choice. I also started sleeping downstairs again. That should not sound like an achievement, but it was. Trauma teaches rooms to keep echoes long after the law clears them. For months I would lie in the old master bedroom and wake at 2 thinking I had heard Caleb on the stairs or Nora at the kettle or the little chime of ceramic against the nightstand. Then I would remember. No blue mug. No careful footsteps. No one listening in my doorway. Just the boiler, the wind, and one old house trying to learn honesty again. Ren had her own echoes. She hid food the first month. Granola bars in dresser drawers. Apple slices wrapped in napkins inside school folders. A half-eaten dinner roll once behind the seed catalogs in the drawing table room. Sonia Patel explained that children from controlled households sometimes store certainty where they can reach it. I asked Ren about it one afternoon while we were potting basil plugs. She would not look at me. Finally she said, "I didn't know when things would change back." That sentence broke me in a quieter way than the big ones had. Because it revealed the constant condition she had been living in. Not terror every day. Instability every day. I told her we could keep snack bins wherever she wanted as long as she did not hide fruit in places where it would rot and teach the whole room a bad lesson. She laughed for the first time that week. Then we created what she called emergency chocolate protocol in the pantry. Healing is not elegant. It is a labeled snack basket and a grandfather pretending not to care that marshmallows count as a strategic food group. By summer the letters began. First from Nora. 3 pages written in blue ink that spent the entire first page sounding sorry and the next 2 pages sounding like management had briefly changed shape into remorse. She said she loved Ren beyond language. Said she had made desperate choices under impossible pressure. Said she had truly believed I needed structure and that some of the things said in the greenhouse were heat-of-the-moment words that did not reflect the full complexity of the situation. Complexity. There it was. The old refuge. I gave the letter to the family therapist assigned to Ren's transition case and let the process decide whether any part of it should reach her. Most of it didn't. Then Caleb wrote. His was shorter. No polished language. No therapeutic vocabulary. No management tone. Just a lined paper letter from a correctional facility saying he knew I would probably burn it, knew he deserved worse than silence, and did not understand at what point getting out of debt had started to feel morally bigger than keeping faith with the people who taught him what work meant. There was one line in the middle that I read 6 times. I got so used to thinking I was solving future problems that I stopped noticing I had become one. That was the closest he ever came to a real sentence. I did not burn the letter. I also did not answer. Mercy and access are different things. The anniversary of Hannah's death arrived in January under hard blue cold and a crust of snow across the rose beds. I woke before dawn and stood at the kitchen window with coffee while the house still held that quiet only winter mornings can make. Ren came downstairs in thick socks and one of my old flannels tied with a hair tie at the waist because she had decided oversized adult shirts were proper snow day wear. She stood beside me and asked, "Are you sad or thinking?" That may be the most advanced emotional diagnostic question anyone has ever asked me. Both, I said. She nodded like that made sense. Then she asked, what would Grandma say if she saw the trial house now? I looked out at the white field, the hoop houses, the quiet dark greenhouse glass. She'd ask why we still haven't fixed the west vent crank properly and then she'd pretend not to cry over the roses. Ren smiled. Good. That morning we went out to Hannah's memorial bench and set a thermos of tea there. Not purple. Plain black tea in a green thermos because some jokes are really acts of war scaled down to survivable size. I told Hannah everything out loud. The arrests. The easement. The trial. Ren's school project on seed stratification that she had somehow made look like a crime board. The fact that the back acreage was safe. The fact that Caleb had written. The fact that I still got angry at random moments in ways that felt younger than my body. The fact that Ren now corrected customers on plant spacing with more authority than politeness. When I finished, Ren set a little packet of sweet pea seed at the bench and said, I told him about the tea because I thought maybe you forgot what bad looked like for a little while, and I didn't want the flowers to go away. I looked at her. The field behind her. The greenhouse glass catching winter light. Hannah gone and not gone. Then I said the thing I should have said months earlier. You saved us. She frowned immediately. No. I just told. Exactly. That was the point. Not bravery in the movie sense. Truth in the child sense. I just told. By the second summer after the arrests, the nursery had started hosting Saturday workshops for local kids. Seed starting. Pollinator gardening. Basic pruning. A little intergenerational program the county extension office helped us design. Ren named it Hannah's Hands without asking me, and by then I had learned the quickest way to honor the dead is sometimes to let a child title the future without committee review. The first Saturday workshop filled in 2 days. 12 children at folding tables under the shade cloth with soil under their nails and opinions about marigolds that deserved less confidence than they came with. I looked around that morning and realized something that took me a long time to accept. Quiet justice is not always the sight of handcuffs. Sometimes it is the survival of use. The land stayed land. The roses stayed roses. The room they tried to turn into a holding pen became a place where children drew root systems and argued about worms. The field they wanted flattened for warehouse access became part of a teaching easement in Hannah's name. And the granddaughter they thought would move south before she understood now stood in the greenhouse telling smaller children not to overwater basil because people drown things by loving them wrong. That line was so perfectly Hannah and so accidentally her own that I had to walk into the potting shed and pretend I needed twine. The final image I keep is not the verdict. Not the cuffs. Not even the blue mug hitting the dumpster. It is this. Late June. Golden hour. The back rose field in full bloom for the first time since Hannah died. Not one or two symbolic flowers. The whole field. Blush climbers. Cream shrubs. Dark red hybrid teas. The pale apricot line I had once argued with Hannah about and kept anyway because she had been right about more things than I ever admitted on time. Wren was carrying the hose with both hands and pretending she could manage the pressure without help. I was behind her mostly to keep the line from kinking and partly because some things in life improve when you admit they are meant to be done together. She looked over her shoulder and asked, "Do you think people can come back after they turn mean?" Not a child's question, and therefore exactly a child's question under the circumstances. I answered honestly. Some can. Some can't. Some only learn consequences. That's not the same as coming back. She thought about that while watering the base of a climber Hannah once named Mercy against reason. After a while she said, "I think flowers do better than people." I laughed. On average, yes. She grinned, then grew serious again. But people can still grow if someone tells them the truth early enough, right? I looked at her then. At the child who had told the truth before any adult in that house had the courage to do it. At the rose Hannah had saved from the grave. At the greenhouse still standing. At the room behind us that no longer held fear. Yes, I said. That's exactly right. And that, more than the judge or the cuffs or the restitution orders or the newspaper article or any of the clean legal words people use after a disaster, is the ending I keep. A little girl told the truth in time. An old man listened before it was too late. And the land stayed alive long enough to bloom again. A year later, I understood something I could not have heard while the case was still alive. Rescue is not the same as repair. Rescue is a door opening while the right people come through it. Repair is what happens afterward when nobody is applauding and the child still wakes up at 1 in the morning because she dreamed she said the wrong thing at the wrong table. Repair is the slower work. The harder work. And it does not care whether a jury believed you. By the next spring Wren had stopped hiding food, but she still asked permission too often for ordinary feelings. If she was angry she would first check whether anger was allowed. If she wanted to stay at a friend's house after school she asked as if she were negotiating access to oxygen. Once, after spilling a tray of tomato starts in greenhouse 3, she froze so completely that for a full second I saw the whole old house return to her body. Not memory in words. Memory in posture. Hands tight. Shoulders high. Breath held. Waiting for consequence to enter the room already armed. I set my own tray down, knelt in the dirt with her, and said, "All right. Let's count what's actually true." She looked at me with wet eyes and no air in her chest. "The tray fell," I said. "That's true." She nodded. "Some roots got exposed." "True." Another nod. "No one's mad yet." Also true. A pause. Then the first shaky breath. We can repot what survives. Still true. She swallowed. I'm sorry. I know. But sorry is not the first step. First step is truth. Then action. That became our thing. Count what's actually true. We used it for spilled milk, school anxiety, thunderstorms, legal letters, bad dreams, and once when a reporter called the nursery asking whether I wanted to comment on renewed allegations that the prosecution had exaggerated family support into elder abuse for publicity. That one came from one of Nora's cousins and a Facebook page that believed every court case was secretly a plot against suburban motherhood. I almost threw the phone across the room. Instead I counted what was actually true. 1. The case was over. 2. People who live by distorted stories often keep trying to sell them after the verdict. 3. I did not owe strangers access to my pulse. So I told the reporter, the public record is available. The nursery is busy. Have a good day. That felt better than rage and lasted longer. Pike lost everything that made him socially interesting. No medical board ever sent me a thank you note for helping reveal what he was doing, which is exactly as it should be. Institutions do not heal by becoming sentimental. They heal by tightening their walls after breaches. Still, the hearing transcript found its way back to Ada, and she read me enough over coffee one afternoon that I felt something almost like balance. He admitted no criminal intent. He admitted poor judgment. He admitted over-reliance on family narrative. He admitted boundary ambiguity. Ada snorted so hard coffee almost came out of her nose at that phrase. Boundary ambiguity, she repeated. That man practically leased his ethics by the hour. The board revoked his license. His name disappeared from the local charity gala programs and memory care advisory panels not because everyone suddenly became righteous, but because professional disgrace is the one language polished predators still understand fluently. Kessler's company never touched Mercer land. Better than that, the conservation easement and the publicity around the case made touching family horticultural acreage in our township suddenly look politically radioactive. He took a plea, paid, cooperated, lost standing with the county planning people, and moved his appetite elsewhere. That is the thing about men like Kessler. They rarely change. They just learn geography. Sometimes that is enough. The restitution process took forever. Longer than grief. Longer than outrage. Long enough to teach me that the state can name a wrong in 1 year and still need 3 more to count the receipts. Dennis Greer, the loud-socked forensic accountant, untangled enough of the money trail to recover about 2/3 of what had been taken or diverted. The rest dissolved into fees, vanished through corporate wash, or became one of those bitter arithmetic truths victims are supposed to accept as closure because the legal phrase for it sounds adult. Partial recovery. I hate that phrase. Still, the recovered money let us pay down the nursery line of credit, modernize the boiler controls, replace 2 cracked vent systems Hannah had been nursing along through sheer will, and build the children's workshop program without touching retail reserves. In other words, the money returned to life instead of fear. That mattered more than the number. The biggest surprise came in September at Wren's school open house. Mrs. Blakely, her teacher, stopped me in the hallway and said, "She's different this year." My stomach sank before she smiled. In a good way, she added. She argues now. I stared at her. Mrs. Blakely laughed softly. I mean appropriately. She raises her hand when something doesn't sound right. She asks for the directions to be repeated only once instead of pretending she understood and then panicking. She corrects boys who say flowers are only for girls. She also wrote a paragraph in science class about root damage and recovery that made the substitute cry. That hit me strangely hard. Because people talk about healing in grand terms. But sometimes healing is a 9-year-old deciding she is allowed to disagree in public. By then the nursery workshops had become regular enough that the extension office wanted to list them in the county family programs guide. They asked for a short description. I wrote something straightforward about horticultural education, intergenerational skills, and safe hands in living systems. Ren crossed out safe hands and wrote trusted hands. She was right. Safe can still sound like a controlled room if you've lived in the wrong kind of house. Trusted is different. Trusted means you are not being managed into gratitude. Trusted means the person handing you something is not waiting for what it will make easier later. Trusted means a mug is just a mug. That winter we held our first Christmas wreath open house since before Hannah died. For years she had run it with military-grade ribbon standards and a totalitarian view of pinecone placement. The first time without her, right after the funeral year, I had cancelled it because I could not bear the idea of strangers laughing in the retail house while the center of my life had just gone silent. The second year, Caleb and Nora were already so far inside the structure that public events had become another thing to manage around me. So the third year, the year after the verdicts, we brought it back. Miriam ran the supply tables. Ada handled the cash box because she mistrusted every float in America on principle. Ren supervised cinnamon stick bundles with the tyrannical authority of a small girl who has recently discovered the legitimate uses of clipboard ownership. At one point I stepped into Greenhouse 1 and stopped just inside the warm humid air. Families were everywhere. Kids with glue on their fingers. Older couples arguing about cedar versus pine. A teenager pretending not to enjoy helping his little brother wire juniper sprigs. The whole room alive in exactly the ordinary public way Caleb and Nora had been trying to liquidate. Ren caught me standing there and came over carrying a half-finished wreath that had entirely too many dried orange slices on it. What? Nothing. That's not your nothing face. I looked at the wreath. It's a lot of oranges. She rolled her eyes. Grandpa. So I told her the truth. I was just thinking your grandma would have hated about 40% of what's happening in here and loved the rest with her whole chest. Ren considered that. Then said, that sounds like family. Out of the mouths of children. The room they once tried to use as my holding pen became the one place everyone asked to sit during open house. Not because the history had vanished. Because history had been answered there and the room now carried a different gravity. We put a long work table under the east window for drawing, seed sorting, and workshop sign in sheets. On one shelf sat Hannah's rose ledgers. On another sat Ren's art supplies, labeled in handwriting that still leaned too far right but no longer pressed so hard into the page. Above the corkboard we framed one page from Hannah's old notebook. Not the joke about concussion. A different line. A garden is proof that return is possible without pretending nothing was damaged. I do not know whether she intended that sentence for anyone beyond herself the day she wrote it. She got a wider audience anyway. Late one February evening, almost 2 full years after the seed packet at the spring fair, Ren sat at the drawing table doing homework while I went through invoice reconciliations. Snow tapped against the window. The boiler kicked on. The whole room glowed with that amber winter light that makes paper and would feel older than they are. Out of nowhere she asked, "Do you miss them?" I knew who she meant. I took longer than she expected to answer. "Yes," I said. She looked up. "Both of them?" That was harder. "Yes." She went back to the worksheet for a minute, then asked, "Even after?" "Yes." Another minute passed. Then she said, "That sounds annoying." I laughed. It is. Because that is the thing nobody likes to admit when families become criminal. Love does not evacuate on the same timeline as trust. It lingers stupidly. It argues with memory. It makes a letter from prison hurt more than it deserves and less than it used to. I told Ren that some people remain yours in old layers even when you can no longer let them close enough to touch the new ones. She said that sounded too confusing. I told her adulthood had failed to improve in that department. She accepted that. There were supervised therapeutic letters eventually. Not visits. Not for a long time. Just letters screened through the court therapist. Ren read some. Ignored others. Wrote back twice, both times with the kind of blunt honesty children reserve for adults who no longer frighten them enough to shape the answer. One of her replies said, "I believe you are sorry, but sorry and safe are not the same thing." I nearly framed it. The therapist said that would be inappropriate. She was right. I still memorized it. Spring returned again, because it always does if you wait with enough humility. The roses bloomed stronger that year than anyone expected. Miriam claimed the pruning schedule finally matched what Hannah would have wanted. I claimed the plants were just relieved no one was trying to turn them into loading dock calculations. Ren claimed roses do better when nobody lies near them. There are some theories not worth arguing with. On the Saturday morning of the second annual Hannah's Hands workshop, we had 23 children on folding chairs under the shade cloth learning how to start pollinator patches in recycled containers. I stood at the front in my old green work jacket talking about drainage and sunlight like a man whose life had become normal enough again to bore strangers productively. Halfway through the demonstration, a little boy in a Phillies cap asked why there was a photo of a woman by the sign-in table. I looked at Hannah's picture in its simple wooden frame and said, "Because this place grew out of her mind before it grew out of the ground." The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then Ren, standing beside the seed bins with dirt on her cheek, added, "And because people should know who built things before somebody else tries to sell them." The parents laughed uncertainly, not knowing the sentence had teeth. I did. Later, when the families had gone and the tables were folded and the sun was lowering over the protected rose acreage, Ren and I walked the back path to Hannah's bench. The easement marker stood near the willow line now, simple metal sign, county seal, trust name, nothing grand. Just enough to tell the future that this ground had already been argued over and chosen. Ren touched the post lightly and asked, "Do signs actually stop bad ideas?" "Not by themselves." "What does?" I thought about the answer. About courts and tea and lies and children and roses and grief and the stupid beautiful persistence of things that root deep. Then I said, people who notice early. Paperwork done on time. And not mistaking quiet for helpless. She nodded like she was storing that somewhere important. Then she sat on Hannah's bench and held up a little packet of sweet pea seeds. "Same as the fair," she said. I sat beside her. Same as the fair. The whole story inside that little paper packet. A warning. A future. A hand small enough most adults would not have thought it capable of changing anything large. I looked out over the back rows, the greenhouse glass, the farmhouse roof beyond, and the land that had remained itself long enough to be saved. Then Ren leaned against my arm and said, "I'm glad the flowers got to stay." I looked at her and answered with the truest version of the whole story. So am I.